Hi folks, welcome back to another review. So this time we'll be looking at the new pack, Bran the Builder. And with me once again is a friend of this channel, Stephen Patane. Hello Stephen.
Hello, how's everyone doing?
So Stephen did the previous pack with me as well, for the Realm, and we took something like 3.5 hours for that one. So hopefully we can keep it a little more brief this time. But I do have my coffee ready in case it goes over the limit a little bit. Hopefully we'll
Yeah,
organize this one
hopefully
a little
not.
better.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to start with, I was going to suggest that we have a look at how the previous pack turned out, since we did that long review, and we had, I think it was almost 6 months without anything else being released in the meantime. I think the previous pack
Yeah.
came out in the middle of November sometime. So we've had quite a few months now to see how it turned out, and do you think it was a success?
Uh, I think for the most part, yeah. I feel like a lot of the cards that I'm looking at in the for the Realm pack, I have seen in regular play. There's obviously some that I haven't, but I mean, I can still see them potentially being in a future deck.
Yeah, at the end we talked about our favorite cards from the pack, and I definitely picked Summerhall for myself, and I think you picked Battle of the Trident, and in
Yes.
hindsight I think that was actually quite a good prediction, because I've had success with Summerhall immediately after the pack came out. I eventually won the Italian Nationals with it, and we have
Yeah.
not just mine, but a couple of decks posted on ThronesDB that have had success in tournaments with Summerhall and with different agendas. I think there's one Banner Sun and one Banner Rose with that. And of course, Battle of the Trident, even though some people thought it was maybe boring and didn't really have any potential as a competitive agenda, I think they were proven wrong. We see it quite often, and serious players play it in competitive tournaments, and I know you've tested it a lot yourself.
I've been playing it religiously for about 5 months now. I'm really enjoying it in Martell.
Yeah, and it's not just interesting, I think it's competitive as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we're also seeing some, well, specifically Martell players were using it as another potential use plot uh, agenda, which makes me kind of glad that we made sure that it removed one of the plot cards from the game at the end after you use the ability, so
Yeah,
that it didn't just accelerate.
even after all of
um,
that effort, they're still doing basically that one thing that we tried to
yeah,
avoid, and it still kind of
yeah,
worked. But, I guess
yeah,
that's the restricted list now has really dealt with some of those problematic Martell cards, so we'll see if
yeah,
that's still being used in that way.
yeah. I still think Wars is better for them with that, but hell, they can use Battle of the Throne if they want.
Yeah, and then a few other cards that have proven to be quite interesting. I think Sir Jousting Bywater has enabled a new deck type. We've seen it, Lannister Manifest God, that plays some of the forgotten cards like the Queen's Assassin and the Red Keep Spy from the discard pile. This is one I've seen, and also Greywind, not seen all the time, but whenever I face Greywind, it's a really impactful card in Stark to cancel a bunch of triggers that you really need to get through. So those are the
Yeah,
two that I've enjoyed from this pack as well, and maybe
yeah,
a couple of others. So Windblown has worked really well in Martell uh,
yes,
as a low-cost assault character, because the big armies are expensive if you want to get the keyword, but this one is quite cheap, and I'm sure you've
yeah.
used it to great effect with all of those Martell armies as well.
Definitely, it's almost too efficient with Host of the Bone Way. With the other armies, it feels a lot fairer, but Host of the Bone Way, once you do get to late game, having a Windblown that can constantly stand them is pretty useful. Some would say too useful.
Yeah, and stands the Tattered Prince, of course, which is the card it was meant to work with.
I've managed to make that work in the Battle of the Trident deck. He stands it quite often.
Yeah, we've seen more of the Tattered Prince with just bestowed with the goal to keep him on the board and get some renown.
Hmm.
I know I've used him previously mainly just to get him in and out of shadows for the Ariane trigger and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And okay, Golden Grove we kind of need to talk about. So that one was not so well received. It's a really popular card, but people are complaining that it's maybe a bit too good. Double use of
Yeah.
Great Hall and stuff like that. Personally, I have not really faced any annoying Golden Grove decks that were really difficult to play against. But I can kind of understand that that interaction is not popular, because the Great Hall
Yeah.
itself, of course, was redesigned to make it unique so that you couldn't have two on the board. And this is basically a second copy, and it's not limited either.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like that was a little bit missed. The fact that Golden Grove itself is just another economy card. Uh, I feel like the small council trait portion of it is still completely fair, but yeah, it could have possibly been either not nearly itself or maybe 2 gold instead of 1. That would have at least made it a little bit more expensive. But anyway, what can you do?
Anything else that stands out for you?
Um, Not primarily. I mean, all the big armies. I've been seeing them here and there. I haven't seen as many decks as I'd like to see with based around those armies themselves. I've been playing with Lord Ender's Host quite a bit in Martell, and I have seen. I feel like I've seen great ranging quite a bit in Night's Watch. If it isn't a VS deck, a Valyrian Steel deck, I just see great ranging, in some form.
Yeah,
Um,
even in that deck I've seen it.
yeah,
Just because
yeah,
the plot for the realm reduces it, and it reduces the wall as well, so it's an efficient include in that, and
yeah,
works with
and
the army as well.
yeah, it's just it's a very good card. I think we mentioned in the last video. I think I may have said, or one of us may have said, that Great Ranging is probably the best of the armies, with Lord Ender's Host following behind it. I think I agree with the Great Ranging part. I'm not certain about Lord Ender's Host. I still feel like it's a fair cost, but it has, in some games, it has really impacted it. So
Yeah, immediately after the pack came out, I think I saw it a lot in games, and then it quieted
yeah,
down a bit with Martell settling for basically the war strategy in recent months before the restricted list. So we'll
yeah,
see if it comes back. And yeah, the others maybe not used as often as we hoped. The Red Wine Fleet, I don't think I've ever faced in a game outside of playtesting for the pack itself.
yeah. I still think it's. I don't necessarily think it's because it's a bad card. I just think because of the current decks that you see Tyrell playing at the moment, none of them include any sort of army tech or really a lot of House Redwine tech. Um, so yeah, I don't really unfortunately see it fitting into decks at the moment. Don't necessarily think it's a bad card yet though. But yeah, you are right.
Yeah, and then the others, I've made some notes here about the other cards that I expected more from. So the Valyrian Steel Armor we saw in testing quite a bit, and it seemed like a good deck. Euron Voltron with Banner Dragon, and then he just stays in play and resists any kind of removal. Seemed like a good deck, but did not really see anything like that after the pack was actually released, unfortunately.
Hmm.
And then, okay, long table doesn't quite work for the 3 cost. We talked about that in the previous review, so you need basically to use it in several phases to make it worth the investment, and currently it's not really possible at the moment, so maybe needs a bit more support. And what
Yeah.
about Sandstone? So I know you've played Sandstone yourself, but I don't think I faced it a lot in games.
Yeah, so Sandstone is one that I've sort of made work, but I also understand that it's sort of a base card for that House of Korgal theme that I know we mentioned in the last video. Um, that it's only going to get more playable over time with the more House of Korgal cards, and we'll see in Bran the Builder one of those, I believe. Um, and I hope to see more in the future that just support that sort of attacking intrigue icon theme, attacking icon removal theme. But at the moment, you're right; it hasn't really seen much play, but I expected to see more in the future.
Yeah, and then the last one I noted was Griffin's Roost. So this is it has an interesting ability. It can put cards in shadows, which is quite rare. You don't often see that being possible. And but somehow in actual games this doesn't really work. It doesn't really achieve anything currently in Targaryen decks. It is non-loyal, so you can use it, I guess, in other factions as well. But I haven't really seen it, or in games where I did see it, it wasn't really doing much, so didn't really bother me.
Yeah,
So.
I've seen it. I've seen it here and there, and in some scenarios, it was just an annoyance rather than something huge. An annoyance where the opponent would have a bunch of gold, they win a power challenge, and they've got a card in shadows. And that could literally be anything now that they can just pull out whenever they want. And in some cases, I'd see like a core Khal Drogo just popping up out of shadows. So it can be useful, but yeah, I haven't seen a lot of it either yet.
Yeah, maybe in the future this one has that passive text that gives John Connington power icons, so maybe something can be done with that at some point. Currently, you cannot really use John Connington as any kind of Voltron to gain a bunch of power. So,
yeah.
Okay, so time to move to our main focus of this video. So we're going to talk about the new pack, Bran the Builder.
Yes.
And well, let's show you this. So this is the release article on. I'll post the link in the description of the video on this website, agot.cards. And if you want to read some of it's basically a article that adds a bit of flavor to the pack. You can do so, and then you can also find the links to the card images for a print, and you can print them at home or you can print them professionally at a printing company, and there's links for both of those options in this article. And it's good to have Steven in this review, because Steven basically was in charge of this pack and also did a lot of work in a bunch of areas. So from the general design to helping with art, and then it was the Iron Throne coding, and also making sure we got the wording right and the rulings right and stuff like that. So you were basically involved everywhere. So first of all, huge thanks on behalf of the community for doing that. And I'll give you the first word on this pack. So are you happy with the way it turned out in the end?
Firstly, yeah. I'm quite happy. It took a lot to get these strongholds into a position where they felt impactful but also fair. So huge props to the design team for actually getting through that. I know I was whipping everybody into shape at some point to get ideas out and testing done. But I feel like each faction has a card that they can definitely work with. Some supporting previous themes, some sort of pushing for future themes. But I think in both scenarios, there's a good card in each faction, and that feels good, I feel.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So we introduced this at the end of the previous review. We talked about each faction getting a big stronghold location in this pack, and there was also some non-unique characters added in the end, because if you check the previous packs that we released, the redesigns and then the packs that came after, it's mostly focused on the unique characters that were still missing a version, or in some cases we got a new version of famous characters like Tyrion and cards like that. But it was important, I think, to add a few more non-unique characters that add to some factions themes in this one.
Yeah. I know with our very initial list of cards with Bran the Builder at the very, very beginning, every single character was unique. I do remember that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the ones that were non-unique from the previous packs came from that South Korean project that happened after or concurrently with the redesigns. And then some of those were copied basically from that South Korean cycle of cards, but nothing really original came before this pack in terms of non-unique characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a few cards for everyone, also a new reset plot potentially, which we'll get to a bit later. But tell us, Steven, what some of the challenges were for this pack.
Well, as I just mentioned, making sure these 5-cost stronghold locations felt both impactful, but at the same time not overpowered, was definitely a struggle. We had to constantly refer back to a lot of the 4-cost locations in those factions, and even though some of them are considered, very frustrating, diverse, we also have to remember these are going to cost 1 extra gold, so we have to make sure that they feel 1 extra gold stronger than those cards. But it didn't necessarily mean we had to make unfair cards. So that's what we were trying to, trying to hit that very narrow target. So that was probably the biggest struggle in this pack. I noticed that focusing on individual factions at individual times during the pack development did definitely help. I knew there was a solid 3-4 months where Pike just had not changed, and it sort of needed to, but we sort of just had to focus on getting other faction strongholds right. I know the Sunspear went through about 10 revisions, maybe, going into different versions. Same thing with Highgarden. So some of them were easier. I know Castle Rock was a quick one, but the biggest difficulty was these strongholds for certain, and how they interact with the current game.
Yeah, just to show you how difficult it was. So this is the list of the 4-cost locations that exist in the game, and as you can see, there's a couple here that have been redesigned. So we have 2 Red Keeps, we have 2 Dorns, then Womb of the World as well. So these are all locations that were kind of broken when FFG released them, so they needed to be dealt with. And then, of course, Hightower immediately was on the restricted list because it had that interaction with Mace when they came out, as well as Silence with Euron. So these two needed to be separated immediately, and these were quite big problems at the time. So that covers about half of the locations that were released by FFG, and the ones that they did get right. So we have Harrenhal, we have the Arbor, we have the Wall, for instance, Winterfell. Those are considered fair by most people. So it's less than half probably. So getting all 8 of the 5-cost locations, or all 9 if we include the neutral King's Landing, is quite a project. And I think if we get most right, we should be pretty happy with that. But there is always a chance with such dominant abilities that there may be something problematic that happens in the next couple of months when people really learn to play these new locations.
Yeah, we tried very hard to think about combos that people would want to play with these strongholds, and trying to make sure that we, are they broken or are they just a good combo? So identifying that's probably, to be honest, probably the hardest part of any sort of pack design. Trying to see in the future for what people might do with the cards.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so we're going to talk about all the cards now in some kind of order. We won't go from first to last, but just improvise it a little bit, and we'll start with the stronghold location for each faction. And just to show you, so for instance, click on Samuel Tarley. There's these rulings that, in case you have any questions, check these individual pages, and it might be answered here. I've tried my best to answer all of the potential questions.
Oh, you have worked night and day to get the rulings of all these cards. If anybody has questions, he's probably thought of it on this page.
Yeah, not
So
quite actually. I did receive one question after I've already done all of this about Casterly Rock, so we'll talk about that briefly when we get to that. But there's always a question or two that you don't really foresee. So
you've got like 50 rulings. I'm not sad that you missed one.
yeah, it's I think it's more like must be 100 there, but okay.
Probably more.
But some are quite obvious. For instance,
Yeah.
if we start with Gendry, it just says that Gendry can pick himself for his own ability and stuff like that, which is obvious, I guess, to anyone who is at least a little bit familiar with the game.
Yeah, but hey, it helps with new people, and we always want to try to support that.
Yeah. So we won't talk about, we won't try to really rank cards because obviously being involved in the design process, we have to kind of be confident that they are pretty well balanced. But we can talk about some of the design process, some of the decisions that went into these cards, and maybe how they can be used in decks, and some ideas. And I was thinking we would start with Stark on this occasion. So this is a faction that has been slightly problematic in recent years. I could say years, I think, because they are stuck with that good stuff deck that they've been playing for a long time, just with some renown rush or using the crossing agenda with a low cost curve to gain power quickly. And it's very difficult to find any Stark decks that play differently. I guess maybe the 7 cost Caitlyn. So I think for this one, the Winterfell Castle, it was important not to basically make a card that can just go straight into that deck and they're still playing the exact same way. So I think to give new options to Stark players was one of the keys here. So I'll let you talk about Winterfell Castle. I'm not really a Stark player.
Yeah, fair enough. So as you can see, this with Winterfell Castle, and you'll soon see with Bran Stark, very clearly trying to expand a little bit on the Old Gods trait, because we've seen the Old Gods trait in the past, and unfortunately, we don't think FFG sort of picked a theme for Old Gods. They sort of just said, picking different themes from Stark itself and just giving that card the Old God trait. They've got Claim Raise, they've got they've got Stand with them as well. They've got like a variety of different abilities tied to that trait. So we're trying to sort of solidify that theme a little bit more. And as you said, not just allow this card to easily slot into what's currently the best Stark deck. And we feel like Winterfell Castle should do this. The save itself is obviously super important, but just the fact that the Winterfell Castle itself is enabling that trait and spreading that trait across characters on the board, we feel like that's a good start to expanding on this Old Gods theme. And yeah, I've already seen quite a bit of play with it. Even competitively, I actually lost to it in a Champions of Westeros match. I think this is a good new direction that Stark plays can go in.
So the top characters, so the highest, those with the highest printed cost gain the trait and insight as well. So do you try to get basically mass insight with this by focusing on one specific cost? For instance, cost 6 seems very popular in Stark with Robb and Wyman, and then you get Fast Eddie and one of the ladies as well. That seems like you should have maybe a few of those in play at any point.
Yeah.
Or do you do a spread of characters and just settle for the highest one having insight?
Yeah. The good thing about Winterfell Castle is it's your choice, right? It's all dependent on how you build the deck. If you want, you can just have a low cost curve, and if your highest cost characters are all three cost. You know, they all gain old god traits and insight. Doesn't matter. And they all have that save available to them as well, just in case. But I feel like the insight is actually the real surprise winner here, making the card super worth it.
Yeah, I did play against a deck like that in testing that just played. There's a few that are worth it, I guess. Alice Sane was good at the time. It's now on the restricted list, but still pretty good. Then you get the Arya and Summer is often played, and you just put a few more in just to get that bonus. You can get Septa Mordain and maybe one or two others. And of course, if suddenly you have you swarm the board with low-cost characters and 6 of them have insight, of course it's going to make a huge difference. But it is a risk to build a deck in that way, and of course you are missing out on a bunch of the impactful high-cost characters that you can get in Stark that way.
Yeah. Last thing I'd quickly mention with this is we originally had it called Winterfell, but we noticed that it would be a little bit unfair if all of the other factions could use both their 4-cost and 5-cost card. So we made the call to call it Winterfell Castle instead, which is already an existing Stronghold card, so it sort of does still make sense.
Yeah, exactly. It was introduced as the name for the Stronghold, basically, by FFG, so it made sense to call it Winterfell Castle, and then Winterfell is the broader area.
Yeah, so you can still use both.
Yeah, and then the other cards. So Stark actually got another big one here. We have Bran Stark, who is an Old Gods character, and he was part of that 6-cost group for a long time, but then his cost was reduced to 5. And actually I wanted to mention with Bran, there is a line in the release article that talks about Old Gods characters cannot be bypassed by stealth or words to that effect, and that is actually leftover from one of the previous versions. This was removed in the end, and only a couple of only 2 parts of his ability were kept. So this passive text that says Old Gods character, each Old Gods character you control cannot be nailed by card effects, and then the claim replacement, which is an interesting ability, can be triggered both on defense and on attack, and it's basically targeted intrigue claim, lets you look at the hand and remove the best card. And this, I think, is in theory should be pretty strong.
Yeah, I can definitely see this. Like, we originally had it working in any intrigue scenario, but one thing we were concerned about is just being able to slot Bran Stark into any Stark deck, and it just being, there you go, your intrigue claim is protected. That's not very. We didn't think that was very fair. So there are a few adjustments here and there. One, now, an Old Gods character has to be participating, which obviously can work very well in Winterfell Castle's case. But he's now clearly kitted a little bit better for that Old Gods deck that we want to try to push, as opposed to just any Stark deck.
Yeah, so regarding Winterfell Castle, so obviously his ability does not prevent cards from being saved, because Winterfell Castle says that you kneel that card to save it, and that's a cost. And costs are not the same as card effects, so Bran has no effect on that. He still works with Winterfell Castle. My impression definitely is that it's a strong card and annoying to face. I know every time I faced him I had to kind of play around that targeted intrigue claim and prevent him from winning the challenge, because you have something like 4 or 5 cards in hand, and there's one that you really need to play after a reset or something like that, and getting rid of that, of course, can win games.
It is also the second, I believe, the second hand knowledge card that Stark now has, that along with Maliam's Tome.
I played Greenside Agenda in the Nordic League, where I had to play a Greenside deck with every faction, And most of the time I just used it to see what cards my opponent was drawing, and then use the Iron Throne, then the more recent version of the Iron Throne that lets you name a card, and then that card cannot be marshaled or put into play. And then I just called the card that I saw with Greensight. And Stark didn't really work because obviously you need to have a bit more hand knowledge than just that. And so it works really well in Baratheon, for instance, and I guess in Martell as well to some extent. But it should really do something in Stark at least, because it would make some thematic sense for Greensight to be viable in that. But okay, just thinking out loud here, obviously it's not going to make Greensight the top deck just because of this interaction. That would be silly.
Beautiful art on this card as well, just as a side note.
Yeah. And then I think we also have Lady. So Lady is a direwolf card that is the first power icon in direwolves. So direwolf decks have struggled in the past with icons. They need 3-cost Bran to give them icons, otherwise they're stuck with just military. And this is the first one that naturally has a different icon and helps to save direwolves as well. So there is more incentive to save direwolves now that Farland can give unique direwolves renown. And of course Sansa as well can get renown with Septum Ordained. They're not really usually characters that have a huge amount of power, but maybe you do want to save them, or at least, even if it's not for power, Lady is more expendable than some of the other cards that you might have with that direwolf trait, or even Sansa.
Yeah. I think at the moment we're providing a nice even amount of direwolf protection. You know, we had Grey Wind also sort of protecting in a certain way by cancelling abilities. We have Lady here now who can literally save direwolves, and it is also good to point out that Lady is summerable. So Summer, which is the other direwolf, can get her from the dead pile back into your hand, just allowing you to reuse her. I think it's been way too long. I'm glad that Lady finally has a character card. For some reason, FFG just did not want her to have one. I don't know why.
I think that was the last one that was missing. I think all direwolves now have an attachment and a character version.
Yes. Yeah.
And there might be more coming up. Actually, I think one of the champ cards that was designed back when FFG was still releasing cards was an idea for one of the direwolves as well. So we might see another one in the future if that ever gets made.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we can have a look at the next faction. Let's go with Tyrell next. So they have Highgarden as their main card, the Stronghold. And this is an interesting one. I think of all the factions, this one is the most typical, the most closely related to the faction's themes. It just gets a bunch of strength in the challenges phase, and we played around with that number a little bit. So it you could originally reveal 4 characters, and then at one point you could only choose one target, and now you can choose different targets if you like, and there is a bit more versatility with that. But in any game where it basically comes down to the strength in challenges, which is Tyrell's main theme, this should be in theory extremely useful.
Yeah. It's we wanted to provide a little bit of a little bit more focus on that reveal. Like, they do have a little bit of a reveal theme going on at the moment. There is my claim, and I know 7-cost Renly also uses revealing cards to give you some sort of benefit. Even though this one here, the reveal isn't necessarily a cost like those two are, it still adds to that theme. As you said, we did bounce around different ideas here, different tweaking. But I feel like the core idea of reveal a card to give strength, that sort of was we're sort of going with that for quite some time, just trying to tweak it because we felt like it was a really good way to go, especially with, as you'll see soon, Tyrell in this pack as well. And yeah, the challenges action you also see on the card, although useful to remove like negative attachments and dodging some resets if you can predict it, it also feeds the action itself. So it's a way to help with revealing those cards from your hand, and potentially with those other reveal effects I just mentioned, like There Is My Claim. That challenges action gives you an option to work with that.
Yeah, you can use a character in the challenges phase and then you can bring it back to hand to manipulate the strength of other characters in theory. But it is losing some board presence, so... if you could return non-unique characters, that would be really great for Tyrell with stuff like House Florent Knight and Olena's Informant, stuff like that, but obviously that's quite dangerous.
Someone said too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With uniques, there's not much. There's Orton, who has a nice ability, and then maybe you could dig for a few more, maybe. But nothing really obnoxious there.
I saw Blue Bard. Was it Blue Bard or?
Yeah, the one that gets you song cards. Yeah,
I saw someone playing with that in playtesting, and I thought that's actually a really interesting idea. I love that.
Yeah, top 10, and you can add any number of them. So if you do this every round, you should eventually get all of your songs in hand. So interesting idea for maybe a combo deck after a long time. Not that people would enjoy that. They do like to hate on combo in this game. Yeah, and this one has very nice art as well. One of the most beautiful cards, I think, in this pack.
Oh, yeah. I feel like it goes without saying that a lot of the strongholds, beautiful art. Or hands down. I feel like that's actually something I was going to comment on later on. I feel like the art in this pack, I can't see many cards that I don't like the art for.
Yes, exactly. And these strongholds, I think, are used for some of the World Championship prizes as well. You can get some cards. I think they're participation prizes with arts from a lot of these strongholds. All done by the same illustrator.
Yeah, I believe it's all of them except for Great Pyramid. I think the Targaryen one is Dragonstone, but that same artist has already done Dragonstone Castle for Baratheon. So I believe that's the art that you see for Targaryen in the participation prize. But yeah,
yes.
They're really good.
Okay, and then Tyrell is the next one. So this one, just looking at my rules text here. So there's lots of stuff, but it's all pretty intuitive. There's nothing weird happening. You can read all of that to get a sense of what it does and doesn't work with. So anytime there is a card that specifically says reveal, you can use her interrupt to put her into play. And if she somehow, you can see her without this reveal word in the card text, then she's not considered to be revealed. So she works with High Garden to some extent, and also with some other Tyrell cards, and she does have a bit of a Missandei vibe, which is usually would not be a good sign, but I think we haven't really found any problems with the way she works so far.
Yeah, I think that the difference between Tyrell and Missandei is Missandei, her discard effect can be incorporated into the core mechanics of the game. So, for example, Intrigue Claim, Missandei works. With Tyrell, you are relying on actual effects because there's no natural way to reveal a card outside of plots, of course. Talking about actual draw deck cards here. You have to rely on an ability to tell you to reveal that card.
Yeah, which is much rarer than discarding from hand or deck. Discarding from deck even works with pillage itself.
Yeah, exactly. It's not impossible, but we noticed that the trigger conditions are more narrow than Missandei, which is why you see that Allah is 3 for 3 compared to Missandei's 2 for 2.
Yeah, so the one card that I really like with this is Exchange of Information. That's one of the rare cards that reveals a good portion of your deck. It reveals 10 cards, so if you see her among those 10 cards, then you can put her into play, and the opponent still needs to give you another character from the remaining cards. And then a Gift of Arbor Red is another card Tyrell has that does that, but usually you would search for cards, which is not a reveal effect like that. So it's not like there's a bunch of them, but exchange is an option for her.
Yeah. One thing I did want to quickly note about Tyrell on the Iron Throne is some may notice that she isn't actually implemented yet. I know that myself and the Thrones team she surprisingly requires a lot of changes for a very simple card. That's still happening, but I think she should be implemented before Worlds, which is nice.
All right. And the lady as well, which is nice for Tyrell, always. And then the last card we have for Tyrell is Bran the Blue, which is an event, one of the few, or is it the only one? No, one of the few. There's a neutral one as well in this pack. And yeah, this one can really affect a challenge. If you have a character that is attacking or defending alone, it gets +5 strength, which is pretty decent already. But then if it's Brienne specifically or another Rainbow Guard character, there's only I think 3 that exist. So Brienne, I guess, would be the main target here. Then she gets +10 strength, which is really difficult to imagine that you would lose that challenge in such a case. And of course it's that magic number that she needs to get to that 15 strength. I mean the one that the rarely played 6 coster that has 3 effects, this one. And then if she has 15 strength, she can stand and draw 1 card, which is I guess the effect you are aiming for ultimately. And this is you can achieve that in with a single card.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't really like that personally. I thought that maybe +8 would have been enough, and then you still need to work for whatever else you need. But realistically, Tyrell is always going to have a little bit extra. So if she gets to something like 13 with this, she would still get to 15 with the other stuff on the board, I think.
Yeah. This one here, I feel like with the +10 condition, it's either going to be on Brienne of Tarth, or it's probably not going to happen. You know, you can use it on a Rainbow Guard character if you really want to. I think 1 gold for 5 strength is already pretty good. In testing, we didn't really see it necessarily breaking anything, which is I think why we didn't bring it down. And there is also the argument that, you know, it's a one challenge event. You obviously can try to reuse it with other cards, but you know, getting a big boost in 1 challenge. I know Tyrell had a few of those cards, but in this scenario here, it still felt right. You know, I do hope to see more of 6 cost Brienne, because she's a very interesting card.
Yeah, just hope we don't get any weird combo that proves to be difficult to beat in the end. But should be fine. I think, was there a previous version of this that lasted until the end of the phase, maybe? Or was that, maybe I'm thinking of Highgarden. I remember playing against Brienne in testing, and she constantly had 15 strength and basically did all the challenges. But maybe...
Yeah, I believe there was an early version of Highgarden where it was targeting 1 player. I know a lot of people were using that version of Highgarden with that Brienne, so it was probably that, yeah.
Yeah, that was really strong. This one much more fair because obviously when the effect expires, she's back to 5 strength, and then you need to work again to get her increased in the next challenge. Yeah, so nice cards for Tyrell that should slot nicely in their decks. And then moving on, let's have a look at Lannister. So this is one of my favorite cards in this pack, Casterly Rock. And this one needed to be good, I think, to convince Lannister players to play it, because the other Casterly Rock was a great card in a lot of decks to get the extra intrigue challenge. And this one, I think, is quite interesting. So at first glance, it looks like maybe, okay, if you're not playing Bestow or any other stuff with the golden cards, this maybe is not the card for you. But even in a worst case scenario, you can still, I think, just use it as an economy card. It's basically costs 5 and gets you 3 gold back, like the Arbor. Doesn't work on the round where you play it if you're using it for that, but then it should give 3 gold for the rest of the game if you put it on safe cards that are surviving rounds. But obviously the idea is to use it at least in some part with the Lannister Bestow cards, and there is a lot of options there. Basically any deck you can think of is bound to have at least something. So you have Clansmen, have Milk Snakes, you have Cersei's Informer that we've seen in the Martell Lion deck that Feuerbart played in the Canadian Nationals, I think. And then Ser Adam is a popular card in some decks. Fever Dreams coming back recently. Lannister Treasury, another one, and there's others as well. So you should find something, even just a Begging Brother should be okay. And this doesn't for instance, Sir Harry Swift has that condition that you need to put it on characters without gold, or cards without gold, I think. But this basically can put it on anything, so you can even go beyond the bestow limit. And it's 3 cards that it fills up around, so should be really strong in my opinion. Maybe if any card is going to cause a problem in this pack, I think this is possibly, I have a slight suspicion that it could be this one.
Yeah, I said that early on. I didn't necessarily say this is a broken card. I said if there was one card in this pack that will break something, it's going to be Casterly Rock.
And the red keep that needs gold for its ability. So after the redesign, you can no longer use that in the plot phase to cancel bodyguards and stuff like that. You need to wait to collect income. But now with Casterly Rock potentially standing in the plot phase, which it should, and if you have a gold on a Lannister character, there's potential to pay for stuff like treachery and red keep and stuff like that, when you shouldn't really have gold. So this is an interesting, if slightly dangerous interaction perhaps.
Yeah.
And so the question I received from one of the French players actually was, if you put gold on your faction card, which you can do, faction card is in play and you can put gold on it. That doesn't mean, of course, that it's in your gold pool now. It's a faction card is a card like any other. So can you use that gold to pay for stuff if Casterly Rock is standing? Is the faction card a Lannister card or is it a neutral card? And I've been checking the rules on that, and it doesn't really say. So it says under faction that cards are considered in faction if they match the symbol on your faction cards, but it doesn't say whether the faction card itself is in faction or not. So I would this is not really official, we can't rule it officially here, but I would guess that House Lannister is a Lannister card. It would be weird if it were a neutral card. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it sort of has to go. It can go either way. Just the way that I personally see it is, I would see all of the faction cards as technically neutral cards, as silly as that sounds. Or either that, or they're sort of in their own, little own pocket that's neither neutral or faction, but that sounds really
maybe they
strange.
don't have this characteristic of basically having a faction affiliation at all. Maybe it doesn't apply. So.
Yeah. I think this is something that, because it can easily go either way, I think we need to discuss it. Maybe with get the global operations team, get their thoughts on it as well, come to an official ruling. But it is a very good question to bring up that the person found.
Yeah, so the idea was that the faction card is the one card that cannot really be removed from play in any way. So that's the safest place if you just want to stack gold somewhere to be used with Casterly Rock. So yeah, but on the other hand, it is slight waste if you have a bunch of bestow and stuff like that. You maybe want to put in on cards that can use that gold for something else as well. But it's a nice idea. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Lannister also has one of the big characters here, Sir Jaime Lannister, new version of him, without a military icon this time. So he has his Kingsguard character with Renown, and he has the Commander trait as well, which is, I think, the first Lannister army or commander with an intrigue icon. I think maybe Red Cloaks is an army with an intrigue icon, but certainly something that can help with Battle of the Trident, because the intrigue challenge there is the one where you have access to a lot of plots, and it's usually the most difficult to trigger with armies, and Sir Jaime Lannister can help that. And then he has this unusual ability that kind of works against characters coming into play in the challenges phase, which is something that Kingsguards usually do like to do, but he goes against that for some reason. Why would that be, Steven?
I feel like I wasn't part of the original conversation about that one, but it was sort of to do with we wanted to give a new potential direction for Kingsguard, or a new, I guess, a new card for Kingsguard to use with Sir Jaime Lannister. But obviously, especially at the time of the pack's development, that Tyrell Knights / Kingsguard deck was sort of just everywhere.
Yeah.
And so it made us think, okay, how can we still support this theme without adding a whole bunch to it? And so this Jaime Lannister was brought forward, which was actually a card that was designed a while ago, but we decided to try it out in this pack, and I feel like just within it, it was just a very interesting card. Technically, you can still use those Kingsguards if you really, really want to stand Jaime Lannister, but that's obviously not really the intention of the card itself. I knew there was, forgive me for misremembering this, that there was a thematical reasoning. I remember that other people who designed him bringing up. I can't really remember it for myself, but I do remember at the time that we thought that justified it enough. I can maybe bring that up later. But mechanically, again, we're just trying to support Kingsguard in a way that doesn't just support what's already really, really strong in Kingsguard.
Yeah, fair enough. I think it blocks any kind of jumpers, shadows, stuff like that. If you just want to play a normal fair game in Lannister, which kind of is unusual, I guess, but you can do that. Or you can, of course, make use of this to stand Jaime. So one idea, as you can see here in the rules entry, so one idea was to play Banner Dragon, or even Targaryen as the main faction, and use Freedman to just to stand Jaime Lannister. And I did see a screenshot, I think it was it today or yesterday, of someone playing Sir Jaime on the Iron Throne and having a bunch of renown on him, something like 8 renown, and winning with that. So clearly it's possible to do that.
Yeah. And one thing to bring out as well is that although this does prevent cards from entering play, you do note that if he is already standing, you can still bring cards out of play. So, into play from shadows, for example. It's simply that when he's kneeling, he will be discarding those characters.
Yes, exactly. So he's the pose then part of the effect will not trigger because he cannot stand if he is already standing.
Yeah, so you can still play it with Kingsguard. It's just, it's got that sort of safety cap there to not completely break with those cards.
Okay, and then the third one we have here is the Lady Whiskers, another cat attachment, the second one after Sir Pounce. And this mirrors Sir Pounce in some ways, so it has the character not kneel when declared as an attacker in a power challenge, but the difference here is that it doesn't give the power icon, so Sir Pounce giving the intrigue icon really, I think, makes it one of the strongest attachments in the game, and it's way above curve in my opinion, so it's fair enough that Lady Whiskers is a little bit weaker in that respect, but otherwise it does most of the same things. It gives Tommen stealth, I guess, if you want to use it on Tommen, but I'm guessing that that will not be the main target for this attachment.
Yeah. This one's pretty straightforward. There's a nice little sub-theme happening with these cats, and I'm. This is just a little. Lady Whiskers is another way to support that. I do see if there is a potential second Tom and Baratheon card that eventually is released. I don't know if that's even really something to think of at the moment. I think I saw it potentially. Maybe in the South Korean cards. I can't fully remember. But if another version of Tomo comes out, I can see this potentially getting more play on him. But even just having, a non-dealing power characters seems really good to me. So, this is just a nice little card to support that theme.
Yeah, I've been playing a lot of this Lannister Brotherhood. I used to get basically a low-cost Voltron with Sir Pounce and then give it some other keywords. And this is another card that works quite nicely in that. And later on, when we get to the neutrals, we'll get to another card that supports this theme of cost 3 or lower uniques as well, which is interesting. So slight shame, as you can see here, that Baratheon can take this attachment, but of course he doesn't have the power icon, so it won't help him unless you can somehow give him the power icon as well.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's have a look at. Shall we have a look at Greyjoy? Yeah, so Pike you already mentioned as one of the cards that was a little bit problematic in the design process, had a lot of versions, and then there was that one playtesting tournament where the version we thought was okay, suddenly it was doing a lot of damage and needed to be redesigned, and then this nice little idea was introduced with warship locations gaining ambush, which to some extent Greyjoy can already do with silence, but this is another way to put those locations into play. Even allows you to put J.C. Drummond, which is a limited warship, into play. All 3 copies, if you have them in hand, for instance, you can ambush them because that gets around the limited keyword, if you like. And then, of course, the other part is the big one here. So after a Greyjoy location enters play under your control, you can choose something with a lower or even equal cost and put it on top of the opponent's deck, which of course is a nice removal effect. For instance, if you can just imagine marshalling Pike, you can immediately choose a non-loyal card of cost 5 or lower to remove from the board, and then any other location gets to do something as well. So silence is a 4 cost, and then every subsequent use, I guess, is a little weaker because the other warships and Greyjoy locations would be usually a 2 or 1 cost, even some 0 cost, and then they don't have as many useful targets there. But I think this one potentially, I faced it 1 or 2 times, I think, in games since the pack has been out. But when this one works, it can be really difficult to play against, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the biggest balance issues we had with this was, and more particularly when we decided to focus on a warships theme here, was well balancing that with the current warship package. There's obviously um, Victorian Greyjoy, who is the warship king that we had to worry about. Um, but yeah, it was finding a balance between an interesting ability, an ability that Greyjoy players would want to use, and also something that doesn't just completely dominate the game in every scenario, but also feels impactful when it enters play. So there's a lot of criteria we're trying to hit with this one. Um, the fact that it triggers on itself, I felt like that was a very important point to make sure that make sure that it worked with the card, because you're paying 5 gold for this. You need it to actually do something with that 5 gold. It is saving you money with warships, but in a scenario where you just have pike and maybe you have one warship in hand, it's essentially a dead card at that point. So it does impact the board straight away, and most importantly, I feel like the underrated part about it is that it primes a card for pillage, right? You know what's going to be on top of their deck. So a lot of the Greyjoy effects, which trigger on certain types of cards being pillaged, Pike is perfect for that, right? At the end of the phase, we did find out that it was an issue that it could potentially draw block someone, which would essentially be you just keep them putting the same cards on top of their deck, and in the next draw phase, they'll just be drawing that card back up, which is why we have that last sentence in there, just to make sure that the player that's versing Pike, it's an annoyance, but it doesn't feel like their entire game is over just because Pike's in play. So I feel like we did a fairly good job at balancing this in both ways.
Yeah, and the non-limited part, of course, also stops any recursion of Night Flyer, because you can choose your own cards with this, if I'm reading it correctly. So you can potentially put your own card on top of your deck if you want to replay it. But Night Flyer is the one really with an interplay effect in Greyjoy that is really strong, but the others I think not so much. Maybe the Bestow guy, the Saltcliffe Sailor, to load some more gold if that is ever used in a deck that has Greyjoy as the main faction. That would be one possibly to use it on.
There's a very niche interaction you could do where you're returning an Iron Fleet Scout to the top of your deck and then somehow drawing a card to then ambush it back out for free, just essentially standard. Very, very niche, but it is still an option. One thing I wanted to mention as well is we thought early on that there have been no ambush locations at the moment, but we did find out that the Valyrian Baratheon warship is the only location that has ambush, and so we saw that and we're like, okay, means we can ambush warship locations. There shouldn't be necessarily an issue with that. So I'm glad that we were able to put that in there. I feel like that's a very unique thing that you don't really see in Game of Thrones. Locations being ambushed from behind.
Yeah, it makes some sense with warships, I guess. If this was recorded a week ago, I would comment that Valyrian is really a useless, awful card for Baratheon, but I did actually play a game last week against someone using it, and I think I played trade routes and had something like 16 gold in my gold pool, and of course that gives someone plus X strength, where X is the gold the opponent has in their gold pool, so it was an auto-win basically on one challenge, and definitely did a decent job there.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Greyjoy also has Eric Anvil Breaker, so this is potentially one card that you could target if you want to target your own cards, because it's a low-cost character that cannot actually stand in the standing phase once you use it, and it's loaded with keywords and good ones as well: Intimidate, Pillage and Renown. But takes a bit of work to make him useful, because he is basically a one-time use, unless you can use cards like a Seal of the Hand on him, or Defiance, or the cat attachments that we talked about previously, if you want to do a Banner Lion,
Yes.
or maybe Lannister Kraken.
Yes, we saw a lot of very interesting Eric Anvilbreaker decks, and similar to Castle Rook, I feel like he's one of the cards that could potentially find a broken combo somewhere, but it's probably less likely than Castle Rock. I think he's a wonderful card. He's just very interesting to me.
Yeah, and the other idea for him was to just have him on the board, to have someone copy keywords in some way. So we have Vargo Hout that can take someone's keywords. We have a Shagwell with that ability that if you have golden characters that can copy some keywords. Patchface takes keywords from Fools. If you can use the event that we will talk about later to make him a Fool character. So any kind of combination like that is potentially gives someone Renown, Intimidate, and Pillage, which are particularly in Greyjoy 3 very useful keywords.
Yeah.
And good traits as well, Ironborn Lord and Raider.
Yeah.
And
I can see him being a one-off in a lot of Greyjoy decks. I don't really see, unless if you're building the entire deck around him, I don't see him being more than that. But yeah, a nice one-off just purely for the keywords alone.
Yes, exactly. I think you either have that one copy that you just use one time, or you have some kind of plan to support him.
Yeah.
But that would be one of those decks, I think, with more than one target for the low-cost character that you want to basically Voltron. Like maybe the 3-cost Theon in Greyjoy is another useful one, potentially.
Yeah.
To serve as a backup. Okay, and then we have Fleet from 10 Towers. So this was originally called something else, and then I think was it mainly the image that changed the title here, because it's
yeah. I think this was originally called 10 Towers Host, and we were trying to find art that would, show more of a host itself. This was the best art we could find, which I still think is lovely art, to be honest. But it showed more of a fleet, so we can still make that work. We have fleet from Pike, same keywords still work. But yeah, I like this card. I like supporting the House Harlow theme, and this seems to do a fairly good job of that.
Yeah, so with Harlow on the board, it of course reduces the cost and also reduces the opponent's reserve value. And even if this is blank, I guess, if the constant ability is not activated, it's still a fairly cheap character with Assault, so you don't need to invest in an 8-cost army to get that Assault keyword, which could be useful even in Greyjoy. And then, of course, if you can make it work, it turns into a 6-strength character with Renown for Greyjoy. And there are tools in Greyjoy to lower an opponent's Renown. Of course, the 10 Towers Galley, which thematically should work with this, does work. That reduces the reserve if the opponent does nothing about it. And there are other ways as well with Harlow and some of the plots as well.
Yeah. The idea behind this card is that we wanted to support House Harlow, but we wanted to support in a way to give them a little bit more of a win condition and a bit more of a board presence. Because at the moment, it's sort of like Harlow is able to lower reserve and potentially discard cards for reserve. To get your opponent to discard cards for reserve, but there wasn't really anything that was helping them win the game. So the Renown here, although small, is a way to do that. And I mean, attacking with a 6-strength character, non-unique character, it's going to be a bit annoying. I know that.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so Greyjoy players should not complain, I think. And let's have a look at Targaryen. So Targaryen players do like to complain about not getting strong enough cards, even though they've been basically at the top of the game from start to finish, which is something like almost 7 years now, with no real period of struggling. And are they getting a good one here? So we have the Great Pyramid, which has one of the most complicated texts. So let's have a look at the reaction first. That cost that Targaryen likes, discard cards from your hand to do something. You can turn that into an advantage once again, which we've seen many times in Targaryen over the years, basically avoiding that cost that is supposed to hurt but doesn't really. And it works even with Intrigue Claim or discarding cards for reserve or for any other reason. If those cards are discarded from your hand, you can put them under the Great Pyramid, and then you have access to those cards. Twice per round you can marshal or play them, and even from other Meereen locations. That specifically, of course, refers to Meereen itself, which also puts cards underneath itself in a similar way. So this one, I think we've seen some complaints already about this being potentially too strong. Personally, I've not played against it since the pack has been out, but I wonder if you have any experience with it.
I've definitely versed it. I played it a little bit myself, but mostly versed it. I've noticed that the card itself is definitely going to support themes that people don't like, right? That's a given. It's going to support burn, right? In some form or way. Anything related to discard will support burn, because I know that quite a few of those cards rely on discarding cards to actually work. That was sort of already accepted early on when we had decided to go with this sort of theme, because I remember we did actually go with a few different versions of Great Pyramid early on, and eventually decided to settle on something that holds discarded cards, sorry. And the primary reason for that, by the way, was we took a look at all of the Meereenese related cards, being Meereen itself, obviously, Meereenese markets, Hisdar, and we noticed that they are actually all very focused on either discarding cards or manipulating the cards that you've just discarded. For example, with Meereenese Market, helping you reuse those cards. And so that's why we thought that Great Pyramid, that theme did fit for this card. But we also obviously wanted to make sure that it's as balanced as possible. As I said, the times that I've seen it get a bunch of cards underneath it. I haven't necessarily been able to see it utilize all those cards as much as I thought they would, even with the passive text being twice per round. I remember for a while that was once per phase. One important thing to note about this is it's less of saving those discarded cards, but more of a temporary second hand, similar to how Meereen was originally doing it. But the important thing to note with that is that you can't reuse those cards for any discard effects. They're cards that you can obviously marshal or play, so events or characters, but you can't, discard with them. You can't ambush with them. You can marshal them into shadows. That does count as marshalling. But it's a little bit more of a limited and, as I'm sure we will note very soon, potentially dangerous place to keep your cards, as if Great Pyramid leaves play, you don't get those cards back ever again. They're removed from the game, rather than being in your discard pile. So, although I do agree that the discard, supporting discard theme can be a little frustrating, I do feel like the card does have enough vulnerability built into it and enough counterplay around it that I don't think it's necessarily the strongest card in this pack. But I can easily be wrong with that. Time can tell.
Yeah, I think it works kind of in the opposite way to most star cards. So you have a card like Kotho, for instance, as the prime example. You discard some resources to put him into play for free to get a nice tempo play that can immediately benefit you. But this is kind of the opposite. It stacks cards for the late game, I guess. It grows over the course of the game, and then with Targaryen usually drawing like crazy and then trying to burn everything as quickly as possible. This gives them more of a chance, I guess, in the late game when the hands get smaller and the boards are reset and stuff like that. But of course, also top decking this late in the game where you haven't had the chance to put any cards underneath it is can be a little bit sad, I guess. Although maybe if you play, you win or you die, and you just marshal it, you still get you can get a decent number of cards pretty quickly. But I think this is one you really kind of want to play that opening late summer feast and get it on the board immediately to get a bunch of cards.
Yeah, definitely. The reaction itself, I'm interested to see how strong twice per round is. That was probably the only thing that I would ever be concerned about. The fact that the reaction is, usable multiple times in a round. But I guess time will tell.
Once for Intrigue Claim and once for Incinerate or something like that, or for the reserve if you play you win or you die, which you might not in Targaryen. With this card you could, I guess, but usually the restricted card of choice there is exchange of information, if I remember correctly, especially for burn, where you just want a big number of cards to throw away for Incinerate, and also for if you're playing a Voltron with Queensguard, you kind of need to do the same.
Yeah.
And all of these cards, I guess, at some point need to be in your hand. So if you compare it to Conclave, where you have basically like an extra hand, especially with Marvin on the board, of course, you get those cards for free at the start of the game. You just put them underneath your agenda. But here, you need to have cards in your hand, so you need to have drawn them in the normal way to then put them in that second area, which is still good, but it's not quite exactly the same scenario.
Yeah. There's always going to be like concerns with negating costs, which this sort of does. But we did try to make sure that we balanced it around that, leaving vulnerabilities in some places. And as you just mentioned, like if you find it late, it's a useless card. It's one that you need to sort of find early, or else it's not really worth it.
Yeah, and then this line I put here, so Sir Meryn Trent, it has a nice little ability when cards are discarded from an opponent's hand, you can remove them from the game instead of doing whatever they were supposed to do. So it has that famous interaction with Missandei, and now of course with the Great Pyramid you can interrupt each card individually, so even if you throw a bunch of them away for Incinerate, you will lose them all because he can intercept them all. So he is a big enemy of the Great Pyramid, so burn him as quickly as possible.
I think he's an enemy of Targ in general, to be honest. But
yeah, with that ability for sure, yeah, can remove all of them.
Yeah.
Okay, and Targaryen 2 has an interesting, unique character. Sir Rolly Duckfield is a Kingsguard character that can provide a save for kings and lords. And so this one was, I think it was non-loyal for a while, but then the Kingsguard deck, as you alluded to earlier, we had that Tyrell Lion deck that was based on Kingsguards, and of course any White Book deck has access to out-of-action Kingsguards, and this would have been a strong card for that. But you can only use him in Targaryen now. Question is Targaryen White Book a viable deck now?
I think it's worth a try. I wouldn't necessarily say it's competitive. However, I feel like this sort of card, it allows that deck to be made. Previously, Targaryen White Book, there wasn't really anything that really worked there. At the very least, Rolly Duckfield, he gives you a way to, survive that deck, help that deck survive. You've got Kingsguard, the Kingsguard attachment saving characters You've got Sir Barristan Selmy saving characters, and now you have Sir Roy Duffield saving characters. I can definitely see Kingsguard deck that's actually killing the board quite frequently, but cards are being saved because Targaryen has that available to themselves.
Yeah, so the main lords, I guess, and kings in Targaryen would be Khal Drogo. Hisdar is a king, and of course Aegon. Usually you try to escape the board with him as quickly as possible. When you use him, maybe do a march to the wall or something to reuse him. So those are being used, and then there are some others if you dig for them. So maybe this is a chance to bring some cards into play that usually we haven't seen. So there is this Viserys that maybe people don't even know about, the two-coster that has the king trait and the lord trait, of course, that likes to stay on the board, unlike the other one. He gains 1 power every round, just passively, basically, if opponents don't control king characters, which is a very possible scenario. And if you could keep this guy on the board and he could just gain that 3 or 4 power over the course of the game, maybe it's worth a try as well.
Yeah, I genuinely do think it is worth a try, but time will tell. I also feel like Aegon Targaryen is also a card that I could really see sometime in the future. I have no idea when. Potential another copy of him, like more focused around staying on the board rather than just pulling in armies. That would be an interesting idea. If that ever did happen, Rolly Duckfield would just be an amazing card. To keep that Aegon in play and give him a military icon. But yeah, I feel like Rolly will just get better over time.
Yeah. Definitely, there are some other cards as well that reference Aegon. I think Septa, what's she called? Septa Lemore, something like that. And, he has, I think, from the source material, there are some characters still that are in that group, basically, that should work with Aegon, that could be introduced eventually.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the third one is one of the non-unique characters we have. Another one with pretty impressive art here, Warlock of Karth, which for a non-unique has a lot of text, but basically what he says is when something enters the dead pile, you can put it into play under your control. That character gains insight, and then at the end of the phase you have to put it back. So if there is something strong that you can use on your side, maybe a character with keywords or with a good ability, or just use it to draw with insight, you can do that. And if you can't, still Warlock is decent enough, has 2 icons and only costs 3 to use him. So this one I think might see some play.
Yeah, I see. This is very clearly for a specific type of Targaryen deck that personally I feel has not had any sort of support in a very long time. I mean, sorry, apart from any burn aspects of that deck, more meaning working with the dead pile in general. We noticed pretty quickly that a fundamental issue with this temporary revival theme, which we see in stuff like House of the Undying, is that it's very reliant on your opponent having good cards to actually kill and then reuse temporarily. We noticed that it just doesn't feel very good if your opponent doesn't, if the stars don't align. So I think we realize that gaining a temporary buff to that card whilst you have it, in this case being insight, is actually a pretty good way to make sure that no matter what card you've just killed, you're getting something back outside of just a character for a turn. Because if that character has renown, for example, you can't save them, so you're losing that renown no matter what happens. You can use other keywords, but temporary character is, I feel like, a lot weaker than people think. So I'd love to support this theme in the future as well, in a similar way that Warlock of Karth is doing.
Yeah, make sure to grab that card for insight. I know this was missed by some players because it has a lot of text, but that character
Yes.
does gain insight. So if you win a challenge, make sure to grab that card. Yeah. So one thing I've made a note of here. So this is more like a puzzle scenario, but I was thinking if you have Naga's Ribs, which of course is loyal, so you would need to have some take control effects to have Naga's Ribs, and then 2 Warlocks, and you can get some kind of loop at the end of the phase where they keep bringing each other into play from the dead pile. And then if you have Drowned Disciple, that can react multiple times. So this is one of those things that is a little bit weird at the end of the phase, is technically outside of the phase. So any kind of limit that applies to a particular phase is you can get around that a little bit, but I don't think we have any official ruling. So I wonder if you could do some kind of infinite loop and then just say that, okay, limit doesn't apply, I'll just gain my 15 power with that. If anyone can figure that out, you can be proud of yourselves, I guess. But given that both of these are loyal, it's not really something we need to worry about, even if it is possible, which I doubt that it even is. Okay, and then your favorite faction, we can talk a little bit about Martell.
Martell, yes.
Sunspear, I'm sure you have some positive opinion about Sunspear, but a lot of the people before the pack was released, I've noticed in the Iron Throne chat and other places as well, thought that this one stands out a little bit. It's a little bit bland because it doesn't have any ability apart from just letting you gain gold, so it's basically just a strong economy card. But then anyone who has actually played it has said that this is pretty good and does some good work.
Yeah, like I'll totally agree with anybody when they say that this looks like a boring card, 100%. But it's one that's just, you don't really see its use until you start playing it. Obviously, if you build the deck right, you can get the right lords and ladies. It just starts stacking up gold very, very quickly. Especially if you can, spread it out throughout phases. And there are ways to do that. For example, it does also count for Martell plots being played. So that's an easy one to trick 1 gold you can get in the plot phase. You can also do Ariane Martell, like core Ariane Martell in any phase to put another character into play. And then, that gets her back to your hand to then marshal her and gain another 2 gold because she's a lady. We've also got, as we'll see very, very soon, a Shadow Trystane Martell, who is another lord. I feel like there's a lot of hidden ways that you can ramp up the gold a lot quicker on Sunspear, as opposed to cards like Casterly Rock, which does do a similar sort of thing here. I think this card, although it is not one of the exciting cards, I think it's still a good card for Martell. Maybe not the best stronghold in the pack.
Yeah, whenever I've played against this, it definitely always did a decent job, because you get to the challenges phase and Sunspear has a little bit of gold, even if it's just something like 3 or 4, and you know that that Prince's plan or something like that can be coming, and then of course it feeds itself in a way, because characters will enter play at some point and other cards, so it's unlikely to run out of gold, and then it can pay for that stuff. In Martell, I guess that Lords and Ladies deck, the one that was introduced in the core set already, had the core Doran and the Viper, and then we had Melario and stuff like that. There's been some support, but it's not really been played a lot. Martell is relying more on the non-uniques and on the use plots on Ricasa lately. So it's nice to get some more support for that if people want to commit to Lords or Ladies. But it kind of works even without that, I think. And any kind of Martell deck. It's not like you have to make specifically a jumpers deck that has a goal to spend in the challenges phase. It's a faction where it's going to happen. I think however you build it, it's going to happen that you can spend some gold in the challenges phase.
Yeah, definitely. I noticed that the decks to note that this works the best with is Shadows decks, Ambush decks, and I genuinely do think it also works fairly well with Lords and Ladies decks, because it just means that you can focus your gold on those important characters and then save another sort of separate a separate bundle of gold for any sort of events you want to play in the challenges phase, or ambush. In some cases, that still works very well. So yeah, I see it's got potential in my mind.
Yeah, and spending gold in the challenges gets around that supporting the Fate as well, which is a plot I've seen quite a bit recently to counter some decks, so that won't work against Martell with Sunspear. And this one I think is not such a huge opportunity cost as some of the other cards, because core Sunspear I think has kind of gone away from decks. Sometimes you see it as a surprise card, but mainly it's not used, so you shouldn't conflict with that one.
Yeah, one last thing to note about Sunspear is we did definitely go through multiple versions with this card. I know for quite some time we focused on summer and scheme plot manipulation, which some people found very, very interesting, including myself. Issue with that was we found that it's either too strong if it's a repeatable effect, once around to, reveal a new plot or swap plots around. But it was also too weak when we, tried to appropriately cost it by maybe, sacrificing the location to do something big. Where it just felt more like it would be better for a future event rather than the stronghold. So that is something that we might explore in the future, more specifically like summer plots. I know that's something that's Martell's they probably could use some more support with. But we did consider that with Sunspear's revision. That's why we went through quite a few revisions with Sunspear.
Yeah, definitely had some flashy versions previously that either were dangerous or weren't feeling quite right. But those ideas I think can still be used in the future.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, and then we have two characters here. So Trystane Martell is a character that can return something without challenge icons to hand, which is a common ability for Martell, returning stuff to hand, and it's another one that works on your own characters potentially as well as opponents' characters. And it's another one of those that, okay, if you are removing all the challenge icons from a character, that character is kind of useless already. We had the same situation in Baratheon. I play a lot of Neil, and when Public Execution came out, we talked about it a little bit. And why would you want to spend 3 gold to kill a character that you've already kind of controlled with kneeling it? And this is the same argument, but yeah, it's sometimes it's just worth it, I think, to if something is getting a lot of power on it, or if there was a huge investment, you play 7 cost Asha, for instance, and then opponent bounces it back to hand. It's could be a strong play.
He's a target for high cost characters for sure. One thing that I would also like to note with this Trystane, which I have done once, is actually using him in the marshalling phase, because it's all he has to do is enter play, and the character doesn't have to be participating, which is one notable difference that you should note. One thing you should note about this character is that he can get rid of the characters before any challenges are made. Compare that to Southern Messenger, for example. They have to be participating before we can bounce them to hand. So you can, if you really want to, use Trystane in the marshalling phase, which I found very, very funny.
Yeah, but how do you get characters to 0 icons in the marshalling phase?
Oh, you have options. You have a few action cards. Technically, Shadows Ariane doesn't say that you have to do it in the challenges phase. So obviously that's not marshalling him, but if cards come out of Shadows in the marshalling phase, that works. But there's also, I haven't got the list in front of me, but there's at least 2 or 3 action icon removals. I think the one that I used was Shadow. I actually used Shadow of the South like twice because it's a marshalling phase, and I had a scheme plot available. I used it. It went back to my hand, then I put it back into Shadows and used it again. But obviously, that's not the best use out of him. You want to use him in the challenges phase usually.
Yeah, and so there was a previous version of this character that's, for good reason, I think it's pretty unpopular. It has a kind of a weird ability where you it has decent strength, but then you need to lose a challenge in which he is participating to even use his ability, and that's not being used. But we have Melario of Norvos referencing him in her text. What does she give him? Insight, and of course Core Doran as well boosts the strength of any Martell Lord. So this one also you kind of want to replay if you can, because he has a good interplay ability. But if you are going to play Trystane, I think it may as well be this one, because he has a more useful ability. And then I guess if you can't replay him, you can just keep him on the board with those cards.
Yeah. And again, it's another support to the Lords and Ladies theme that works with Sunspear as well. So yeah.
Yep. Okay, and then just a brief word on the art for this card, if you would, Steven.
Yeah. So the art, this one, surprisingly, not many artists out there drawing Trystane Martell. So we actually had to get this art specifically commissioned, and I actually think it was the same scenario with Great Pyramid, if I remember correctly. Flavio had figured that one out, I believe. But yes, that we'd actually paid someone, commissioned this artist, and I think they did a pretty good job. The turnaround for this was very quick as well. I think like a few days and they were done. It's fantastic.
Yeah, looks very nice.
Yeah.
That's a few cards now that were specifically, a few arts, I mean, that were specifically done for this community project of releasing new cards. And there is another one later in this pack that we will also discuss. But first of all, so we have another Martell card, Scorpion Knight. And this one was a lot of work in the design process, but not for any great reason. I guess we've just wasted a bit of time. It has this new triggering condition where you can react to losing a challenge icon, and we tried really hard to find alternatives to this that would make it clear what exactly it's reacting to, and in the end it was just not worth all of that effort, and we went back to this original text. Just simply says after a character loses a challenge icon, you can react to that. And then ruling needed to be done, what exactly constitutes a character losing a challenge icon, and it was discussed among the GOT and the design team to have this work basically anytime you apply one of those loses a challenge icon effects, whether it's a constant ability or a triggered ability that applies a lasting effect. You can react to that even if that character doesn't have the icon, or if it has 2 instances of that icon, you can react. So for instance, confinement on any character will just give you 3 reactions to Scorpion Knight immediately. Yeah, personally I would have maybe ruled the other way, because there was a chance to say here that, okay, if you are not doing anything that functionally changes the game state, you can't react to that. But it's long been established that you can target icons and keywords and other characteristics that the card does not currently have. And I know that's the original one was Nymeria, the one with no icons that can take an opponent's icon. She gets on some people's nerves because she can target icons that don't technically exist. But that's long been established that you can do that, so it kind of makes sense in a way that you can react to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, this character, the character itself as well. It's obviously 3 for 2, but with the potential to be 3 for 5. It fits the theme. I remember we talked earlier about the previous pack, Sandstone. This is a card that's going to sort of start to push that theme of challenge icon equals, sorry, attacking with challenge icon removal, equals winning. um, this very clearly, fits the theme that Sandstone's trying to do. We have had some people noting that it's a little bit weak, and I do agree to an extent that it could have been a little bit better. However, I do see more support for House Korgal style cards in the future, and this will only, similar. I know I've said this for other cards like Rolly, but this will only gain strength over time with more of those cards that come available. The other thing to note as well, which I know, Audrey, you're aware of this, is because it can hit icons that character doesn't have. Effects such as Shadow City Bastard or Confinement immediately get Scorpion Knight to 5 strength. So you have that option available to immediately turn, that 2 strength chart into a 5 strengther. So I do see that being, in some cases, either a threat or just utilized to win the challenge. If you see Scorpion Knight attacking and they have a Shadow City Bastard in play, the Martell player has options that the opponent has to now consider. So I think the card shows potential and will get better.
Yeah, definitely not too difficult to get the strength increase in Martell. If you're playing a dedicated deck that removes a bunch of icons, you should be getting it, or just the odd card like Confinement and the Shadow City Bastard. Those that basically target all 3 icons are the most efficient, but even just anything smaller can help a little bit. And I think the Knight trait as well. I've played against Tyrell Knight's deck, and we saw in the 8 Regents tournament that is coming up, Martell fought quite hard to get more of those Knights agendas, even traded for, I think, for Banner Rose and some of the others that can play those decks, and getting Knights on the board can be useful. Recently in Martell it's proven to be a positive trait as well.
Yeah, so this is just another addition to that. Granted, I'm not sure how well they'll be able to utilize the icon removal aspect of it, but as I mentioned, you can find those cards pretty easily. It's just whether you have the room for them.
Yeah, so rulings-wise, just one last thing we've noted here. So if an effect is expiring, like for instance, Off to Galtown gives characters icons, and then when that expires, you cannot then react with Scorpion Knight, because a positive effect expiring does not constitute a character losing a challenge icon, and I guess that goes for any characteristic in the future, for any card with similar wording that reacts to gaining or losing a characteristic. I hope we've set a decent precedent here for that. It's caused quite a lot of effort and time to get this one right, so hopefully it doesn't backfire in any way in the future.
I think we'll be good. I think we're good. As a Martell player, I think that I'm happy with it.
Alright, and then we have 2 more. So we have Baratheon, my favorite faction, and yeah, Steven and I are both currently, we've been drafted into the Baratheon team for the 8 Regents tournament that's coming up, so hopefully we are still both in that team when this is uploaded. I think we will be. I think we are basically done with any trades now, so we have to find ways to make use of cards like Storm's End that we have here. And so first of all, okay, lots of rules text here because it's a completely new ability. It says you can kneel Storm's End to change the challenge type to power, which is something that has never been done before. So if you want to know all of the specifics, you can read this, but just shortly, basically means that if you initiate a challenge of a different type, a military or an intrigue challenge, that counts towards your one challenge of that type, and you can react to that challenge type being initiated. but then the rest of the challenge is turned into power and resolves as a power challenge. You can react to winning or losing a power challenge. You apply power claim and all the modifiers that work in power challenges, like traitor to the crown or the Baratheon red keep. They all work in a challenge that becomes a power challenge with Storm's End ability. Yeah, so this one, we've had quite a bit of work with Storm's End over these past few months that the pack has been in production. So it had a bunch of different abilities that kind of worked in a similar way. They got you an extra power in. Sometimes it was in a similar way to the plot, the King's Peace, and stuff like that, reacting to a challenge being initiated, and then you move one power to your own faction card. And all of this was pretty slow. The tempo hit at the beginning was pretty big, and then of course the power challenge at the beginning when there is nothing on faction cards doesn't really help, so it was just not worth including. But this version, the one thing I like the most about it, I think, is that it immediately has at least some kind of impact on the board. If the opponent is initiating a military or intrigue challenge, you can use immediately Storm's End ability to turn it into power, and then of course it doesn't really matter in the early game if you are losing a power challenge and having to satisfy power claim. So that's one thing that has helped. And I was worried about this, I will be honest. It's a unique ability and it can lock games in some way and can be difficult to play around, but so far I haven't really heard anyone have anything particularly bad to say about Storm's End. I think it's in the end it's turned out pretty fair.
Yeah. I see, out of all the strongholds, I see Storm's End, to me at least, as one of the more interesting ones. Not necessarily the strongest, but just very interesting, purely because it's doing something completely different that we haven't seen before. In itself, I feel like it's worth 5 gold. Obviously, you're going to find scenarios where it works and some where it doesn't as well. But I mean, that's sort of the scenario with a few of these strongholds anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely I've tested it in a bunch of different decks, so usually I'm not really much of a rush player, but I did try it in some of the main Baratheon decks that go quite fast, and it's not the best idea because you're still paying 5 and then it takes a while before you can turn other challenges into power on attack and make use of the additional power claim. And I found it better on defense, just playing stuff like Bara Summer with the Grand Melee plot that kind of locks the game, makes entire challenges phase basically fizzle because it's impossible to push anything through, stuff like that. And I think also in decks that are not as much rush, but they do focus on the power challenge and then become stronger once they get their stuff on the board in the mid to late game with cards like the Red Keep and the Bastard of Nightsong, Traitors to the Crown in play and stuff like that. And then if you have Storm's End, especially in games that have a time limit and it's important that 1 or 2 power swing in the final round can be important. I think that's where Storm's End shines the most. And I've even had some success already with it. So this weekend, in fact, yesterday I played an Assault from the Shadows deck in one of the friendly open events that went undefeated, and it did use Storm's End quite efficiently, although I think it's fair to say that all of these decks where Storm's End is used and can be used do kind of work already. It's not Storm's End that makes them suddenly viable, but it definitely feels like a card that has its place in a few of those decks.
Yeah.
And quite versatile as well. Can be used in in different stuff. And actually, I've had people surprised when facing it. That I've had someone surprised that it works on attack, and then another player surprised that it works on defense, because you can alternate even if you have a basic game plan of where you are going to use it, you can alternate it during games to your advantage, whatever the situation is. So that's definitely something I really like with this card.
Yeah, and you've got very, very niche combos or very niche opponent. You know, if you're versing, for example, Sea of Blood or Reigns, you're pretty much countering their entire deck, or countering most of their deck with this. You know, by stopping the challenge, you know they're going to win. As when they if they win that challenge, it's no longer in military intrigue. It's now a power challenge, so they can't trigger those agendas. And you've also got sorry, who's that Baratheon character that can stand locations again?
Sir Eldon.
That's him. Eldon can also reuse this as well for, you know, in any way that you want, because it's if you're the attacker or the defender.
Yeah, exactly. He works really nicely with that, and also, as I mentioned, the Bastard of Night Song and the Red Keep. But these are all pretty expensive cards, so it takes a while to get all of that, and it really helps in the late game. But of course, if the plan is disrupted in some way, of course, it can be difficult to do. Yeah, so we had a passive ability before that stopped any triggers for characters without a power icon, but this reaction was it proved to be pretty dominant and wasn't really needed the strong passive, so we changed it into this stand prevention, basically similar to Delena Florent. But it's not that great if you think about it, so anything that stands in the challenges phase usually will have the power icon. You can stop, for instance, Jon Snow, which ironically is one of the characters that Delena cannot, because he has the bastard trait. The wilding one with just intrigue and military. And Targaryen has some stand. It threatens, for instance, Darion Harris, and maybe you can find a few others, maybe in Stark, that would like to stand Greywind or something like that. That would be stopped, but mostly characters with characters that stand will have that power icon, so Storm's End will not really block that much of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so two more. We have Gendry, another pretty interesting card that I know you've played quite a bit, so why don't you take the lead on this one?
Yes. So this Gendry here, we wanted to make a Gendry that sort of fit his role in the Brotherhood without banners. And you can sort of see that with, you know, both his passive and reaction relying on non-loyal characters. Now, something about Gendry is that at first he seems very specific in the fact that you need, you know, non-loyal and you need weapon attachments. And although that is, you know, that is a fair point, in the decks that you do get that working, he is very, very useful. I know for myself, for example, I've been playing him in a Baratheon Mama's Fast deck, which has been proven to be surprisingly efficient. Because, as you may know, with Mama's Fast, any fools that stand gain the top card of the deck as a weapon attachment. Thus, Gendry can trigger his ability onto them and give them renown. Or, in the case, which I feel like is sort of fitting, that you give Gendry a Warhammer, the Warhammer attachment, because he's 5 strength, he also gains Intimidate, which again, you can then spread onto another character. The reaction's sort of meant to mirror the Brotherhood agenda as well, where, you know, it's the start of challenges phase reaction, and it's helping one character on your board become a Voltron, essentially. It can technically be Gendry himself, which I know you've mentioned in your FAQ. Not really always ideal, because he's, you know, just a one icon character, but that is always an option. for yourself. I feel like he's sort of proven to do what we wanted him to do originally, which I feel is great.
Yeah, he had an extra icon initially as well, but he is still pretty good without it. I think we opted for the strength increase in the end just to make him work with Warhammer, because actually there aren't that many weapons in Baratheon. If you think about it, let's have a look. So it works with neutral ones as well, but in Baratheon you have the Warhammer, then you have King Robert's Warhammer and Lightbringer, and of course Warhammer is the main one, and there aren't enough of them to go around, so you need one on Gendry to give him a second keyword, and then you also need some other character to have a weapon attachment to be an eligible target, and that's why, of course, the Mummer's Farce is so great, because everyone has that weapon attachment already. But in other decks you need to work for it a little bit. There are some neutrals as well, and of course I don't know if there is anything missing from the source material here that could be a potential weapon attachment, but anything else that is released with this trade for Baratheon will be very helpful, I think, for Gendry as well in the future.
Yeah.
And the non-loyal thing, actually, even though Baratheon does have some very nice loyal characters, I found it to be not so difficult. I've even played in some of my Neil decks before we got Robert. Okay, Robert is really indispensable lately, but I played Lemon Cloak, who is one of those Brotherhood characters that benefits from the non-loyal team, because it was so easy just to drop all the loyal characters, especially the low-cost 3-costers, 2-costers, none of those that you really need with the Relore trade are loyal, so it's not that difficult to achieve this in the end. Okay, and then we have Antlerman. This is another interesting card. Used to be Monocon, just had the Intrigue icon for a long time, but there was some fear that it wouldn't be used because the Merchant trait is not that useful in Baratheon, so against all the other charts that they have available, this would maybe not be the first choice. But with 2 icons and an interesting ability, so it can gain you gold after power is moved to your faction card. That can mean power claim, which is timing wise not that great for Baratheon, because usually they don't spend that much gold in challenges. But if you do it in marshalling with cards like Stormland's Fiefdom or Sir Richard, is it Richard Horp?
Richard Horp.
You can do that before or during marshalling, and of course even after in taxation or in the plot phase you can use Antlerman to gain some surprise gold, which some factions could really use, Martell for instance, or Knights, which have those events that cost gold in the plot phase. Baratheon has nothing like that currently, I don't think, but in theory gold in the taxation or plot phase could be a nice thing to have if any card is ever released that makes use of that.
Yeah, I know the primary reason that we were happy to switch this to a power icon, because originally it was 2 cost, 2 strength Intrigue, was also the fact that its reaction natively works with power claim. So we thought it would also make sense to allow it to help even just a little bit with triggering that reaction through that power claim.
Yeah, it looked kind of weird to have that Storm's End that focuses on power challenges and then 2 characters without the power icon in the same pack.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally we can have a look. Well, finally there's neutrals as well, but the last faction we have is Night's Watch, and they have a new Castle Black, which is another choice to be made because the previous one is being used quite a bit, but this one has quite a strong ability. I've faced it a number of times and found it one of the more difficult ones to play against. It can stand Night's Watch characters on defense when challenge is initiated against you, so helps to defend the wall or whatever else you are trying to do on defense. or it can stand Castle Black, which is useful because it kneels for its other ability, and that allows you to cancel an opponent's triggered location ability. So you have basically 2 cancels per round potentially with Castle Black, and that can really mess up some decks. For instance, if you imagine Baratheon that we just talked about, cancelling something like Storm's End and Chamber of the Painted Table every round, both of them is yeah, a lot of value, I think.
Yeah, I feel like this interrupt here is, in my eyes, it's probably one of the best parts about the card, just because it's the only real stronghold here that's able to counter the other strongholds. But also, if you don't see those strongholds, it can still work with Night's Watch. They have their their choke theme that also works. You can use this on economy as well. So, an opponent tries to gain 2 gold or reduce it, even though you are kneeling your 5-cost location, it still stops that. That's the whole point of the location. And the reaction itself can help you either. It still works whilst it's knelt, of course. Allows you to either reuse Castle Black if you know there's another location you want to cancel during the challenges phase, or obviously, as you mentioned, standing a Night's Watch character is always used for defending the wall, for example. So a very versatile card, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a nice idea actually. I didn't think of using it on economy. Usually, okay, that's the one I play that has the Stewards team. It has a low cost curve, so getting a 5-cost location is pretty expensive. But then, if you permanently block King's Roads and stuff like Dornish Fiefdom or Underground Vault from ever triggering, this could be pretty decent choke.
Yeah.
And we had originally we had the text as when the effects of triggered location ability, so without the word opponents, that allowed you to just basically cancel the forced interrupt of the wall, so that it wouldn't kneel on the first unopposed challenge you lost. But then it turned out that this was not really needed. It's strong enough, I think, as it is.
Yeah, it was that along with the standing a Night's Watch character. It just made it impossible to ever kneel the wall, which is, I don't think, very healthy for the game.
Yeah, it already kind of works with the wall, since you can stand
Yeah.
a defender potentially.
Yeah.
Okay, and then another character here that is pretty famous story-wise, and we have a 6-cost Samuel Tarly, steward character with a power icon, which is not the first one, but it's quite rare, and has the Meister trait as well, and one of those threefold abilities like Brienne of Tart that depends on the reserve value, so the more you have, the bigger the benefit, and in Night's Watch it's trivially easy, I think, to get some reserve increase. Okay, 10 is the highest we have here, which you can get, but with normal plots, if you have a 6 reserve plot, you need 4 modifiers, which is a bit challenging, but anything more than that, stuff like exchange of information or counting coppers, you have quite an easy job, I think, and this is turns into quite a strong character.
Yeah, I feel like this is a very interesting card. I want to play around with this guy more. I've just been busy with other decks, but supporting both Maesters and Stewards, obviously with these 10 or higher, you can stand a character that shares a trait with them. I feel like he can fit really, really well into either of those decks. An important thing to note as well is if you do manage to get 10 or higher reserve, which, as you mentioned, it is possible, even with just plots alone, with, for example, counting coppers, you can also stand pretty important cards like Great Ranging, as that is also a steward. So the 10 or higher condition, I feel, is a very interesting one. The other two, still very, very useful and more achievable. I really like this Samuel Tarly, just in general.
Yeah, possible to give him traits as well, of course. it's reasonably easy, I think, to give him the builder trait or even the ranger trait. You have that attachment, the first ranger that works on. He can take attachments. There's not many in Night's Watch that can take them, but he can, and you can play around with traits a little bit. But obviously, it's more efficient to just focus on the two he already has. And then you can find stewards that have multiple icons as well, as you said. Great ranging, and Bowen Marsh is another one, and one or two more that are more impactful than the usual low costers that don't have that much text in this particular deck. Focusing on stewards.
Otherwise, if you're really crazy, you go Many-Faced God. And you give him a trait from someone in the dead pile. There's also that.
Yeah, you can play around with that a little bit. But of course, yeah, that part only happens if you have 10 reserves.
Yeah.
So that's the one that will happen the most infrequently. But the other two should be quite easy. The one you really kind of want is, of course, the power gain, 8 or higher.
Of course, yeah.
Then he needs to be participating. So with something like Satin on the board to stand him, you can maybe try to get 2 per round, which is a pretty good value.
Yeah. I'm also I really like the art for him in this one as well. The artist Colin Boyer was gracious enough for us to use the art, and it was very nice.
Yeah, it looks nice. And then we have First Builder. So this is the last one of these attachments that all have a very similar text. They give the corresponding icon and trait. In this case, it's the power icon and the builder trait, and then they have an ability that depends on the number of characters you control with that trait. So in a builder's deck, you will have a bunch of builders, and in a non-builder's deck, you can have maybe 2 or 3 to search for something. But I guess the one that immediately springs to mind is the wall. You can get 4 builders and search for the wall to make sure you do get it, or you can search for the cheaper ones, the cravens, the milks, the haunted forest, stuff like that. With this attachment, doesn't 100% follow the pattern of the previous ones. As you can see, this one says unique character you control only. The previous two could be put on characters you didn't control, but we felt that this had a more realistic chance of being put on an opponent's character and still use it in some way to get the search, because there is the no attachments theme, of course, in Night's Watch, which can make it awkward to put attachments on your characters.
Yeah, this was a card where we had to sort of balancing act of, let's not make it too strong for builder decks, and we do still have to bring this card in just to finish off that round of attachments. And of course, we don't just want to make the card and throw it away. We want to make sure it's playable and interesting to use. So yeah, that you control only is pretty important, as the standard builder decks that you find, it's very rare to find unique characters that can take title attachments. So we at least feel there it's going to, at least if you want to use it in a builder deck, it's possible, but it's going to be a bit of a different deck for it to work properly, or for it to be worth it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's it for the factions, so just the neutrals remaining. And previously, in the previous review, we started with the neutrals because, of course, there was an agenda, and we wanted to show you that immediately because everyone could use it. But here there isn't an agenda or any card that really affects everyone in the same way, but there are still cards that can and will be used. And we have King's Landing, which is a neutral 5-cost location. This one does not have the stronghold trait. It would not make sense really, but it does have an interesting ability. So, well, interesting. The first time I read it, the previous version, it's been changed slightly since then. I thought it was quite bland actually, because it just gains gold and draws cards like that Night's Watch location that draws cards if you kneel stewards. I forget what it's called. The new gift maybe. And yeah, it seemed pretty boring and questionable if it was even efficient. But having played it, it even proved to be a little too strong. So we had to arrive to this current version, which is yeah, it's quite interesting because you do need to change your economy set a little bit with this, because you need King's Landing locations to kneel, of course, to get gold, and if you want to draw cards for that as well. And let's have a look at King's Landing locations that currently exist in the game. So you will see that all the gate locations for each faction have the King's Landing trait, for instance King's Gate or Lion Gate, and then the neutral one as well, City Gate. So these are economy cards that have that trait, and I think we found the best strategy for King's Landing was just to include 3 copies of your in-faction gate location, and then 3 copies of City Gates, which is a card you never see outside of this particular interaction that we've just introduced here. And of course it's City Gates itself is not that efficient as economy, so there is some opportunity cost. You would much rather have a Rose Road, but then when you do get all of these King's Landing locations, suddenly the benefit can be pretty huge. You can get that 2 gold every round, and anytime a new one enters play, it basically replaces itself. So top decking these economy cards in the late game no longer a disadvantage.
Yeah, this is definitely similar to Sunspear. It's one of the cards that it looks either underwhelming or boring to start off, but once you do start playing it, you soon realize it's very, very efficient. It's in providing you economy in turns after you've put it down. I know, for example, as long as you have one other King's Landing location on the board, it's essentially just a +2 gold for the rest of the game.
Yeah, and even in the round where it enters play, it immediately gives some gold back. So it's you basically just pay 3 gold for it, essentially, when you get the 2 back.
It gives the gold back as long as you have the King's Landing locations on the board. Yeah. Which hopefully you do by that point. And also the fact that it's treated as, I would still count it as non-limited economy, which is something that's not really thought about. It's one of the. I feel like this is one of the underrated cards. I would say that it was borderlining in the design, in the testing process. It was borderlining on too broken and not useful enough. We were trying to really find that sweet spot. I hope we have. But I can understand people who look at it and just don't want to bother with it. I would say give it a chance, give it a go, try it in your decks. With the strategy that you just said there is the perfect way to, I would say, start using it. 3 in-faction gates, 3 city gates, and 3 King's Landings. That can be your entire economy package, which in my opinion is very good. Being able to have an entire economy package of 9 cards, which also provide draw, I feel like that's just very efficient. And I've seen that in the decks that I've used these King's Landing in as well.
Yeah, definitely had a lot of success with it so far. So anyone who says it should have been made stronger, there is just no way to improve it and not have it be broken. I think it works too well in decks that use it and are not disrupted in some way. Even if you do play Political Disaster, obviously you have to have a lot of locations for King's Landing to work. But it kind of resists it because, first of all, it's unique. So we've seen Tyrell use their unique economy very well with Political Disaster because you can dupe it and then it stays on the board. And of course, if you keep King's Landing itself and another location, it still provides 2 gold just from its
On top of
own
the gold of
ability.
that other King's Landing location as well. On top
Exactly,
of that gold.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing that we also want in the design process, I remember this was the key thing we wanted to make sure worked, even though it probably won't be the primary use of this King's Landing, is making sure it works with the current underplayed streets, which are also King's Landing locations. The reason it will always work with them is their ability kneels the fashion card. It doesn't kneel itself, meaning King's Landing can easily utilize those cards every round.
Yes, exactly. And I don't really remember the last time I saw any of these street locations in play, or even many of the others that are listed here. Obviously, Flea Bottom from the Neutrals is played, and the other version of King's Landing is played. Shadow Black Lane occasionally, and then of course you have the Iron Throne, which means that it does tend to favor Baratheon a little bit because they naturally include the throne because they have the dominance triggers that they can use. But I think in any faction except maybe Night's Watch that doesn't. Well, even Night's Watch does have the King's Landing trait on the Flea Bottom alley, but that's the one that usually you would not consider, or any faction that doesn't have a good gate location that they would want to use. Some are quite specific, for instance Lion Gate. If you have absolutely no shadows, then probably this is not the way to go. Yeah, and speaking of shadows, of course the two cards that Lannister has, Alchemist's Guildhall and Tunnels of the Red Keep, do come in and out of place. So for instance with King's Landing you can technically kneel them twice per round to just get the card draw from them, but they do need to kneel for their other effects. So this is not such an efficient play.
Yeah, we did keep that in mind. We didn't want this to be too efficient with the already useful Lannister cards that we see in almost every Shadows deck.
Yeah, so give King's Landing a try if you haven't already, and we'll see what you think of it. Okay, and then we have the two plots. We have Bran the Builder, which is a very simple one. Simply, after you win a challenge, you search top 10 cards for a location and add it to your hand. And the immediate comparison we had to make for this was, of course, with building orders. It's a similar ability. This one has 5 gold instead of 4, also a bit more initiative. But the reaction is delayed, of course. You don't get the location immediately, and also you can't find attachments with this. But you do have the option in theory of getting more than one, of course, more than one location into your hand if you can win 2 challenges.
Yeah, it takes a little bit more work, but I feel like it's got a pretty clear distinction from building orders, but it is still a similar card.
Yeah, I've seen, I think in the video I recorded of the King of Swiss game in the Champions of Westeros League, Alex actually opened with Bran the Builder, and then he had silence on the board, and he could search for warships and then immediately use silence to put them into play in that same phase, which is something I had not seen before, but it was a nice idea.
Yeah, no, I like it. It's got that. You can even use it with Pike, to ambush those locations immediately. I think you've written in the rules FAQ, Salad or Sand is a good and interesting one as well for Tyrion's Chain, Salad or Sand.
Yeah, that's not going to happen, but the theory is that.
You could.
Yeah. And legacy trait, so it's not a kingdom. The 5 gold is not a lot, but in Manifest God, of course, you are prevented from playing kingdom plots, and you could use any gold, and those. I'm thinking Lannister, for instance, would like some locations in play for those decks, like a Harrenhal or a Lion Star in some of those decks.
Yeah, I can see this being a good plot for clansmen, even trying to find those specific locations that you're looking for, and of course being a decently non-kingdom trait plot with 5 gold.
And the other one, the Mad King's Command. So this is the big one that will impact the game in some way. Currently we haven't seen, it's still early days I guess, so we haven't seen the full impact, but it has quite an interesting ability. So it doesn't happen when it's revealed, it happens at the beginning of the challenges phase, the same timing point as First Snow of Winter, for instance. And each player can choose up to three cards of any of every card type, and then a combined 3 cards in their hand and shadows. And anything not chosen is removed. It's put to the bottom of the owner's decks. So it's kind of a huge reset for basically all of the resources available. It levels the cards in hand, it levels the characters on the board, the locations. So it will damage any deck, I think, that goes to any kind of extreme. If you swarm the board with a bunch of characters, you will. It's like a wildfire assault basically for those decks. It will hurt if you have too many locations, maybe even more than Political Disaster, because they can't be saved. So decks that draw like crazy and then dupe all of their locations can resist Political Disaster better than they can resist this. And I guess attachments not so much. It's rare to find decks that have more than 3 attachments in place, so I think those will actually maybe even benefit a little bit, because they're using the allowance basically of keeping 3 attachments more than other decks would.
Yeah, it does hurt Mama's Farce. I know that. I've noticed that.
Yeah.
As they, yeah. I'm really excited. I've been excited for this plot to come out for quite some time now, and I'm looking forward to continually see how it affects the meta, if it does. I like that we thematically went with the number 3 here. Primarily, you see another card, Wildfire Assault, which does a sort of a similar thing where it's keeping 3 characters and killing the rest. Mad King's Command, which would have, thematically have been a very similar thing to Wildfire Assault, is working with that same number, just in a different way. And I feel like there's the sort of plot that, it can hit a large variety of decks. Obviously, at the cost of also hitting yourself in that same way. And it's just because it's a challenges phase beginning. It's a reaction to the challenges phase beginning. It's an inevitable thing that you're both preparing for in the marshalling phase. It puts a lot of strain on both players, I've noticed.
Yeah, I played it a few times, and I'm never sure what to do in the marshalling phase. You kind of count the cards you can keep, and then you still have 6 in hand, and you want to put them on the board, but then they get wasted either way. So I've never managed to play it without getting at least some kind of waste, or played against it without being affected, and basically having to put some additional cards to the bottom.
Yeah, and we have been concerned with specific agendas if they would prove to be too strong. One of them was opening with Knights of the Hollow Hill decks. Although it's you can do it, I don't think it's actually going to be that strong. Mainly because you are still hurting yourself as the Hollow Hill player, unless if you can, of course, get all of your almost all of your hand onto the board quick enough. You don't get to draw cards after the setup phase, whilst your opponent has. So you're putting yourself behind the cards in your own hand as well. And with another agenda which we wanted this to work in was Battle of the Trident. We did notice that Battle of the Trident itself has very few. When you're versing a Battle of the Trident deck, you know that your opponent can't play certain plots. For example, Valar Morghulis and Valar Dohaeris, right? 2 very, very useful resets for very specific decks that deck just does not have access to. Mad King's Command, even if you're not using it in that Battle of the Trident deck, we at least wanted that to be an option so that your opponent has to think, this person could play Mad King's Command and completely ruin my day if I just build wide, for example. So I think it was important that we had that edict trait in there. And yeah, I don't see many other agendas that this could be an issue with. Yeah, off the top of my head.
Yeah, I even tried it. I even tried that strategy with Knights of the Hollow Hill, and in the end, I wouldn't even open with it. I considered the situation, and I still opened with the other option, which was fallen from favor, because it's more impactful later on for that deck. It doesn't have many locations because it doesn't play conventional economy, so you can always delay it a little bit, and it works better as a slightly more late reset. Yeah, and it helps if you can do something after it triggers. It's not that easy, of course, because you are down to 3 cards in hand, whatever happens. But the boards are small usually, so if you can somehow introduce new characters onto the board, or if you can draw a little bit after that, it's useful. And I think Trident can flip out of it into something like Reinforcements, for instance, which can work a little bit.
Or I think that the best one to flip out into is siege preparations. So you open with Mad King's Command in the plot phase. Force reaction happens. You're down to 3 cards, and then you win a power challenge and flip into siege preparation. Draw back up to 6 or whatever your reserve is, and you've immediately got an advantage over your opponent at that point.
Yes, opponent is down to 3 and nothing they can really do about it. It's, sounds good in theory, so we'll see. I've played against it a few times since the pack has been out. Never did a lot of damage, but then I do kind of play decks that can survive it. So we'll see if it has an impact. Definitely in the World Championship. I know the Stranger, when it came out, it wasn't being used for the first couple of weeks, and now suddenly it's in a lot of decks, a lot of those Lannister shadow decks that just like reset after reset, they do make use of it. So maybe it takes a little while for people to get used to this, but eventually I think it will be played to its full potential.
Yeah.
Okay, we have one character here, Zolo the Fat. That's the first non-Targaryen Dothraki character that we have, so neutral Dothraki.
Yeah.
And as you can see, this was designed back in the day when the city plotline was everywhere, and you can sacrifice him to basically steal any gold if the opponent is gaining gold outside of just collecting income, which of course City Festival was doing a lot, and that chain with City of Spiders. So it's a little bit behind, I guess. It's come too late to counter that after At the Gates was banned, but still there are some effects that can gain gold. For instance, trading with the Pentoshi. You can play yourself and just steal the opponent's gold, kind of reminiscent of that original Klydas play that you could do, just taking all of the Pentoshi gold back for yourself, if you like.
Yeah. I feel like if for any reason the Global Operation Teams decides to unban At the Gates, which I have no idea if they even plan to do that, Zola the Fat is immediately a very good card, I feel. But yeah, he's an efficient 3-strengther that you can just have on the board as a threat to any deck, and he's either going to just be an efficient Chud, or he's going to give you a lot of gold at one time. Either way, I think he's a decent neutral.
Yeah, it's not a waste whatever you do. Kind of like, for instance, the cat Balerion. You can just invest in that one copy, even if he's not going to ruin the Iron Bank or anything like that. It's fine. You're fine with just paying the 2 gold for a Chud.
Yeah, or similar with like old Bill Bone. Like, your opponent might not have a lot of faction Neil abilities. Well, nowadays they probably do, but having one copy of him is, always useful.
Yes, exactly. And both have the mercenary trait as well, which sometimes could be useful in some decks.
Yeah.
Okay, then we have the Horn of Winter. So this is an attachment that gives assault to characters, which is quite rare. We had Foam Drinker in Greyjoy, but usually assault is reserved mostly for D8 cost armies, and a few of the smaller ones, which actually have been really well received. So this is a way to give assault to any character, and
Unique character, yeah.
yeah, unique character, and of course you can give it to something like a Tywin Lannister to basically be able to target any location in the game, but mostly, of course, even just a 4-coster or something like that will be good enough. And it works particularly well against stronghold locations or the wall, while the 4-cost one is a stronghold anyway, because if you assault them successfully, so that means if you target them with assault and then you do win that challenge, you can sacrifice the Horn of Winter to discard those locations from play. And as a backup, there is this blanking option. If you are not facing strongholds, you can just sacrifice to blank something, which yeah, you're losing the attachment and losing the assault keyword, but sometimes even just during the challenges phase, to have something permanently blank instead of just during a specific challenge could be useful.
Yeah, with this one here, it was. I remember me and you, Audrey, we were talking quite a bit about this. We're trying to get the wording right with this card for just a variety of reasons, and the whole extended blank effect that comes with it was sort of a, I guess, an after effect of that discussion. It's something that you don't necessarily, like, we thought you don't necessarily have to use it, but if it becomes useful, that's great. Its primary use, as you just mentioned, is stronghold locations or the wall. It's good to know that the 6-cost wall isn't a stronghold, so it can still target that one. But yeah, even if you're just paying 2 gold to give a character assault, I feel is a very useful card with just the reaction as a lucky bonus if you need it.
Yeah, definitely gaining a strong keyword. We've had that in the past with attachments giving Intimidate or Renown or Stealth, and 2 cost is quite a bargain for that, I think.
Yeah.
So just be careful about one thing here. The attached character doesn't need to actually be participating, so you can use other assault characters and then still use the Horn of Winter if that somehow works out for you, although it's at this point it's quite a rare keyword, so I don't know how often that might come up, that you have 2 on the board.
Yeah. One minor interaction which I did appreciate is that this does work with Harmer Dog's Head from For the Realm, where you can fetch Horn of Winter and chuck it onto a unique character of yours with Harmer.
Just reading her now to see. It's one of the cards that I don't have in my mind completely.
Yeah.
It's a nice interaction.
Yeah, I mean, she's a wildling, so it's sort of having a wildling fetch the Horn of Winter is a niche interaction that I think we can appreciate. But yeah.
Yeah, actually, Harma is quite interesting because she can be used to find in-faction cards. It's not just the neutrals. Usually you don't include wildlings in decks as a rule, but definitely it's worth checking if you have any item or weapon attachments in faction that you are using in your deck, and maybe just do consider that. I think it's at this point slightly underrated as a card.
Yeah.
Okay, so are we down to the last one? I think so. So we have this event. Hopefully I will pronounce it correctly. Florian and Jonquil.
Yep.
That is a song event, and maybe a word about the art first. So we have this one especially again for just for this card, and it's gone back to the usual art style for the song event. So we had previously the Winter Maid, which didn't quite work out. It has more conventional art, but this one goes back to the same style as stuff like Last of the Giants or a Cask of Ale or stuff like that. The song events from the FFG era, which I think is a nice touch.
Yeah. This was actually someone in the design team. Their friend had offered to make art because they're just a big fan of Game of Thrones in general, and they were happy to just be part of this. And I'm ecstatic about how it turned out. It fits perfectly for we showed them some example art of the other songs, and they just ran with it. And I feel like it fits really nice in my opinion.
Yeah, just showing a couple of the songs. So we have here The Bear and the Maiden Fair and Wolf in the Night, Rose of Gold. So as you can see, all of these have this kind of cartoonish style that works really nicely for the song event. So it was kind of sad not to use that with the Wintermaid, but I think in general the art has been really great in the last couple of packs. There has been a lot of work invested in that.
There's been more support lately, which is the important part, and we hope that anybody who is interested would also let us know, let the GOT team know. More importantly, Anyway,
now the ability itself, of course, is another one of those cards that work with unique characters with cost 3 or lower. As we mentioned before when discussing Lady Whiskers and some other cards. This one gives renown, and there's a few characters that kind of have struggled in the past to gain renown that would really use it. For instance, the Lannister Myrcella Baratheon character that can participate in 2 or even 3 challenges just with her ability of not kneeling. And it was difficult previously to give her renown, but this is a way. Of course, it's an event, so it's not permanent. It lasts only one phase, but it can get a few power for her or for someone like Angui the Archer, who can do 2 challenges, maybe even more in certain decks. So this is a nice way, and actually it was being used with some of those cards in particular, and not with Fools and Knights, which was the original intention. So that second part was added, that it attaches itself as an attachment in the style of Risen from the Sea, and gives the character the Fool and Knight traits, which of course Knight traits don't have that much experience with, but certainly the Fool trait in a Mummer's Farce is very useful for a character that doesn't have it already, because it will get those face down attachments then.
Yeah, and also can combine with Shagwell quite well to gain keywords. This event here, an important thing to note about it, which we really wanted to keep when we were designing it originally, was we wanted it to be an action, because we wanted it to also loosely support cards like Tom of Seven Streams, who stands characters after song events have been played. And having this event as an action, or it could have been a challenges action, but action still fit fairly well, allows you to trigger that Tom of Seven Streams reaction at any point, rather than having it to needing to meet a condition to then react to the event being played. So we feel like this did a pretty good job at that. The renown is just thematic, I feel, and mechanically feels quite good. And I feel like this does, as you just mentioned, it opens up decks like Mummer's Fast to actually spread the amount of fools that they have into something playable. I know, as I mentioned earlier with Gendry, I've been using this event quite often in Mummer's Fast decks, just to make a Chud a fool and use them in some way. I feel like it adds a lot of value.
Yeah, for me, one of the stronger cards. Obviously doesn't fit everywhere, but in the decks that can use it, it's really strong. Originally, I actually even drew a card at the end, like for instance off to Galtown, but it was way too much. Was not needed at all in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we've covered everything. So let's see what the time is. 2 hours 39. Okay, we're a bit over the limit, but not quite as long as last time. So we can
Yes.
wrap it up. So let's have a few final thoughts. So first of all, I would like to show you. So I'll show you this print document with the cards that you can print yourself, and these are, of course, slightly better versions, higher quality versions of the cards. And again, huge thanks and congratulations to the art team for making this really beautiful on this occasion and basically on every occasion. And they do a lot of work, and it's a very small number of people who actually contributed to all of that. So they are kind of overworked, and I think they are some of the hardest workers and the most people who deserve, I think, the most thanks for getting this this pack released in the way it's turned out.
Definitely, they good art makes the cards feel even stronger. That's the way I like to see it.
Yeah, so I'll put a link to this website, as I said, where you can find those cards yourself, and you can print them. There are files for home printing and also for having them printed professionally. It costs you something like an FFG pack would cost you to buy it in a store previously, so it's around the same, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so
do we want to do a quick point out of what our favorite card is in the pack?
yeah, like we did last time. Sure, I think
we'll quickly,
there won't be any surprises here for me again. So last time I picked Summerhold. This time I'm picking Storm's End. Obviously, it's going to be a Baratheon card, and it's already pretty much done what I wanted it to do. Won me a tournament and played it in 2 different decks in the last 2 friendly open events, and I think I had 7 wins, 1 loss, I think, combined. So it's doing good work for me, and it has a very interesting ability. So there won't be any surprise there. But if I had to pick a second place, maybe the cat one. So that's also a deck I like to play. So it's nice to get a new attachment for that, and I'm sure I'll be able to make that work along with Florian and Jonquil, which is another support card for that.
Yeah.
So I will.
I
I was going to ask you the same thing, but I want to have a quick guess. So let's assume that you are not going to pick Sunspear. What could it be? Could it be?
I'm gonna give you a hint. My favorite card actually isn't Martell in this pack.
Okay, would it be Gendry maybe?
He's one of them, but I wouldn't say he's my favorite. I'll tell you. My
Go ahead.
favorite in this pack, I would say, is actually Mad King's Command. I like how it turned out. I like how the thematics of it. I like the art. The stats seem reasonable. To me, it feels like a really, really nice card. Especially, by the end of with the amount of loops that we had to jump through for this card in the end, it turned out to be one of my favorite, I think. And if I was to look for a second place, again, I'm going to try to not be biased and just pick Martell for the fact that they're orange. I might actually say like Florian and Jonquil and or Warlock of Karth. Again, just because they're doing interesting things that we don't really have a lot of support for. I really like those cards that allow for new decks to be made. And I feel like those 2 cards can sort of do that.
Yeah, and I was going to ask if there is any card we are maybe worried about that it could be the strongest in this pack and maybe above the curve, but we kind of talked about that already. I think the one I'm worried, if I had to pick one, would be Casterly Rock. I think that's the most dangerous. Maybe the Great Pyramid as well, if people can make use of that.
Yeah, I was going to say the one that I'm worried about the most is probably the Great Pyramid. even though we did go through a lot to try to make sure it's balanced, I can still see, and I think it's just a combination of the cards that will be utilizing Great Pyramid are also just annoying cards, like Burn, for example. So it might not reflect as much on the Great Pyramid's strength, but it'll potentially cause the most frustration. But yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I think with all the cards released, there is nothing for Burn, I think, since the FFG era. So this is the first one that kind of will find itself in.
It doesn't just work for Burn.
Yeah, so it's fair enough. They do complain a lot that they're not getting the cards, but it's a bit silly. Burn is always strong, but on the other hand, it's never the top deck, but it's always been playable pretty much for the duration
it's
of
a frustrating
the game.
deck to verse. Yeah.
Okay, now finally let's have a quick look at the future. So as you can see, Bran the Builder here is the last pack that is available on ThronesDB. Usually there is one also that is in production, but currently not quite here yet. But there is something planned, isn't there, Steven?
Yes, so we have indeed, we've started the design process of the next batch of cards. It hasn't, as you can see on ThronesDB, we haven't actually released them yet at all. All I can really comment on it for now is that you can expect a high amount of honor in this next pack. You can probably figure that one out for yourself. But you'll eventually see in the coming months, you'll see the cards show up on ThronesDB. As you'll probably say very soon, we are always open for people with playtesting. We want as many people to try to break these cards so that when they do get released, we don't have to, restrict things later on. There'll always be things that we miss, and the more people that we get in to help with these packs and to help make sure that, we've got balanced but interesting cards, the better. And everyone's welcome.
Yeah, definitely, and make sure to look out for the playtesting tournaments as well. I always or whoever organizes them, they usually advertise on Facebook and in the Discord servers and the Iron Throne, stuff like that. So you should be able to find them if you want to participate in those. And of course, any help with art and stuff like that is much appreciated.
Yeah.
Okay, and the final thing we would like to talk about in this video is, of course, a couple of the tournaments that are upcoming. As you can see here, there are a few big ones coming up. So we have the World Championship. This is set to take place next weekend, May 21st, and already has 49 registered players, so should be a big tournament. It's an online event played on the Iron Throne, and just a symbolic entry fee basically that gives you a participation prize, which is some cool cards with the art from these strongholds. I think well worth it, and if you have the time, everyone I think should try to take part in this one. And this is the first big test as well for the Bran the Builder cards. I'm sure there will be people taking this one very seriously and trying to find anything broken. So if there is anything, we should find out pretty quickly.
Yeah. It's also good to note that it's the first, I believe it's the first online World Championship. Is that right?
Yes, it is, and should be one of the bigger online events as well. So I think there was the Polish Championship last year had over 40 players. This one already has 49, so it might. I haven't confirmed this, but I think it's going to be the record for sure. Yeah.
I know us in our very small Australian meta here, mostly in Sydney. I think all of us, except for maybe one, are able to participate. Even though it's late night for us, we can't miss out on this. This is huge.
Yeah, the Chinese coming as well in numbers here. They have really good results in any event they play usually. And some players from North America we can see. And of course, I'm sure the usual suspects, everyone who plays in the online events, the friendly opens and the nationals will be here as well if they can, if they have no conflicts time-wise. We'll see all of them, and yeah, will be interesting to see what decks do well here. So Martell has been nerfed a little bit with the latest restricted list, which
Yes.
we haven't talked about, so maybe a brief word. So actually I think it's in the one tournament that was really competitive, that had the best players, the China versus Europe Championship, it proved to be the best deck, so it kind of makes sense to nerf it a little bit and make them play in a different way. And that part of the restricted list I kind of like, except for the Annals of Castle Black, so the neutral card. And it does, unfortunately, does have some collateral damage. Let's just show you here. So the Bounty of Highgarden, for instance, is restricted, so you cannot play that with Annals now. And also Alice Sane. I played a Tyrell Wolf Ladies deck that already had this weird two restricted cards, Alison and Bounty, and had to choose between them even though they were restricted for completely different reasons and weren't really a problem in the same deck. And now there is a third card added as well to basically counter anything Martell is doing, and it's hitting some other decks, but nothing that major, I think, that it would be worth complaining about here.
Yeah, we didn't really, as you would know, in the design team, we didn't really have a lot of say in what the actual restricted list was. They did come to us to help test it, which I know a lot of us participated in. Yeah, I think the idea was that, and I remember I brought this up when discussing it with people, was the Martell decks themselves, they weren't competitively dominating. They were just, the issue with it was they weren't really playing any other style of decks. Even though, and I'm an advocate for, different variety of decks, even though there are other competitive decks out there, they were just defaulting to either a used plot deck, utilizing Host of the Boneway and that sort of stuff, or Knights of the Hollow Hill. And so I know that I remember that they stated the restricted list, especially now, is more focused on generating a fresh meta, getting new decks out there, rather than restricting broken decks or broken combos or strong combos. Because, realistically, those Martell decks were strong, but they weren't consistently winning every tournament. But this should hopefully, especially with Worlds coming out, bring out a whole bunch of interesting Martell decks. I surely hope so. I know I have an interesting one lined up for Worlds personally.
Yeah, I'll be playing Baratheon, so hopefully there is a place for that to do well as well. So the decks we've seen recently, Stark crossing the Martell decks that use the used plots mechanic, and Tyrell line Kingsguard deck are the usual suspects, I guess. So, but we'll see if the new pack shakes things up a little bit. Statistically, I think actually the best deck in the game currently is Lanny Kraken Shadows. It wins 67% of games, I think, with a huge sample size. So if people come with that and take things seriously, I think that will get some results. And kind of wish that was nerfed a little bit with the restricted list, because it's really difficult to beat. But hopefully Stark comes out in numbers as well, and maybe counters that a little bit with its speed.
Yeah, there's one thing I know that came out of the global operations team was you can't really please everyone. It's like me as a Martell player obviously wasn't very happy with the restricted list, but I know that you can't please everyone with the restricted list. There's going to be people that will be like, "Yep, that makes sense. That's awesome. That's great." And there's going to be other people saying, "This is the end of the world."
Yeah, exactly.
you can't have the best of both worlds. It's for the better of the game in the end, and there is also always the option that if it is too far, it'll get peeled back later on. And that goes with any restricted list, realistically.
Yeah, I think so.
I know they did that with Burn Danny, for example. Isn't that right?
Yes, she was taken off. It moves slowly these days because there isn't that much data. But with a big tournament like this, if there is an obvious problem, I think there could be one coming out very soon after Worlds to correct anything if it's
And
anything
they're doing
problematic.
very well with the upcoming tournaments as well. So I hope that we do see more games. We see more people joining, which is fantastic. I'm really excited for this. And the more data we have, the more data that the global operations team can also look at, the better the game's going to be in the end. So I think it's good in the end.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see everyone in the World Championship, hopefully, and the other event taking place shortly after, of course, is also the 8 regions. This one has 66 players, so I guess World still has some way to go to get that record. And this one should be very interesting. I think it will be pretty much open spectating, and hopefully some streamers as well to cover it. This is a fight between teams, and a lot of familiar names here as well, and should get some very interesting games with different agendas, so it won't be anything stale like those 3 or 4 same decks in every game. We should see some interesting matchups in that. And also,
I'm really excited for this tournament.
Definitely. I think we have a good shot in the Baratheon team to do well in that, especially with the new cards. And also finishing up shortly is the Champions of Westeros. So we have the Spring Edition that's currently taking place. This one at 46 players. Well, oh, actually, the Champions of Westeros in the old days had more than 100 players, so that would have been the record, I guess. But in recent times, definitely 40 is a huge number. And this one has reached the cut now as well, so some games still to be played, I guess, today and tomorrow. And everyone with 4 wins makes the cut in that one, so there should be around 16 players fighting it out for in the cut of that one. And I'll try to maybe record a few of them if the players are up for that. This one is not open spectating, so if someone is kind enough to allow us to record the game, we'll try to do that as well. And I think that just about covers everything we had in this video. So I would like to thank you, Steven, for joining me again for this one. Maybe we can make this a tradition and do another one when the next spec comes out as well.
Yeah, definitely. Totally excited. I like talking about cards.
Yeah, okay. So anything else you think we've missed?
Not that I can see. I'm looking forward to seeing how these cards affect the upcoming tournaments, and hell, even if some cards turn out too strong, it's still exciting. Let's restrict stuff if it needs to be, but I don't think that's going to be the case.
All right. Okay, so we'll say goodbye here, and thanks to everyone for joining us on this one, and hopefully see you in other videos and in maybe a future review as well. So thanks for joining us, and goodbye.
Bye bye.